It's quite amazing sometimes when you'll get an obscure reference that'll go out and say, oh yeah, I had this square dance record. I heard it in 1956. It's got this line. It says, "Has anybody seen where Betty Brown's been?" And sure enough, somebody will know what the record is, what the label was, who called it, where.
Yeah.
We have a gal in our one of my square dance clubs out here whose name is Alice, and every so often somebody new will come in and say, "Who the heck is Alice?" From a square dance song from the late 70s, early 80s. Anyway, okay. I do not have Wade Driver's LS603, and I just, now that you gave me the title of it, I don't have it in my binder either. The song is not Bill Bailey, it's Barnacle Bill Square, done by Cal Golden on the Old Timer Records. So that's S8067.
Barnacle Bill, okay.
And then I printed it out. And I love the intro. Honors to old Arkansas, that's your corner lady. Honors to old grandma, that's your opposite lady. Honors to your mother-in-law, your right-hand lady. And honors to your pretty little ta, your partner. That's the intro. Swing your partner round and round, cried Barnacle Bill the sailor. Promenade around the town, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. Right foot up, left foot down, stomp the ground when you come down. Home you go and swing him around, that's Barnacle Bill the sailor. Figure one has everybody chaining across, chaining back, chaining across, and then swing your corner. Figure two is two head gents chaining across and chaining back again 4 times, swinging. Figure three is two head ladies chaining to the right, and you do that 4 times. Figure 4 is two head ladies chain to the right, 4 ladies chain across, 2 head ladies chain to the right, 4 ladies chain across. Figure number 5 is right and left throughs, back and forth, and then you have a closer.
So on that, I would limit that to your 2 figures and do what Bob was saying. Just instead of doing the gents chain,
yes,
head ladies flutter wheel, side ladies flutter wheel, all 4 couples flutter wheel.
Yes.
Alaman left and away you go.
You got to do it 4, 1, 2. Yeah, you got to do it 4 times. I'll figure it out. I'm not having a problem with that. I mean, it's such a low level that it's not too hard to figure out.
Yeah.
It's just that.
Hello, Joe. Long time no see. Yep.
What was the question about San Antonio?
Just Wade Driver was looking for a copy of it.
Oh, well, I actually have a copy of it. I don't know that I've ever used it, really.
On Lightning?
Well, not on Lightning. This is on Lone Star that he did on Lone Star.
Oh, he might be looking for that.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is the top of the hour, and we are getting ready to start. So I would ask that you feel free to interrupt if you have anything to add, but by all means, please go ahead and mute yourselves so that we don't have a lot of background music. As always, thank you to Mark Hart, who is acting as my co-host, chair, and IT guru extraordinaire. And for this session, I want to say thank you to everybody that has sent in comments, their own experiences with the SSD, their own complaints about SSD, their own complaints about what's wrong with BASIC and mainstream, and everything that made this session happen. This session is essentially an objective look at what is going on with the SSD program, what is going on with the BASIC program, and this nonsense, and I say this not tongue-in-cheek, but with all seriousness, this nonsense that's going on about, oh, why are we doing SSD? We've got a perfectly good 50-movement program. Why aren't we doing BASIC? BASIC doesn't work. We should all do SSD and get rid of mainstream. All of this other kind of stuff, which are, in my opinion, completely unfounded arguments based on fear and a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge. So I was asked to do this session. Perhaps I'm not the best person for it, but these are my interpretations from objective analysis. And at the end of it, by all means, we'll have a discussion and we'll actually start looking at some of the realities between these 2 programs so that you can make your own decision. Okay. So although the title is controversial, it's a strong attitude amongst a lot of callers and dancers today, and some callers fight and argue very vocally against the social square dance program. Others readily embrace the change and have taken it to heart, and others just give it lip service, and so on and so on and so on, and the list goes on. So we already know that the basic program of modern Western square dancing. So let's just take a step back here. It was a program developed with the intent of having a limited number of movements, so 50 movements that have clear definitions, so that the dancers could get dancing, enjoying themselves on the floor very quickly in about 20 lessons. And after learning this program with new and other social friends, they could go anywhere and be expected to dance the basic from any standard application, most extended applications, and they could dance for a year or so. And if they were comfortable and they wanted more, they had a good foundation to learn any subsequent programs if they wanted to, with no pressure. They could go and learn mainstream at a mainstream club, or they could, use that. It was a foundation keystone. Basic was a destination. It was a stepping stone for all the subsequent programs, if the dancers would choose it to be that. Now, we look at the SSD program, sharp contrast. The SSD program was developed with the intent of having a smaller program of about 50 movements with a clear definitions that could get dancers enjoying themselves on the floor quickly in about 12 lessons. And after learning such a program with new social friends, they could go anywhere and be expected to dance SSD from any standard application with a little bit of standard application variation. The only difference between these two programs is the SSD adds on at the end. It's a standalone program that the dancers could dance, and if the dancers wanted to learn mainstream or higher level, they could be taught at workshops elsewhere or go to other clubs. It's a foundation first philosophy that's a destination program, not a stepping stone. The reality is Basic and SSD have exactly the same mandate. They have pretty much exactly the same template. They have exactly the same number of movements. They have exactly the same principles behind it. They have the same concept that this is a destination that you can dance, and if you wanted to learn more, you can go elsewhere. It gives you a foundation to learn more, but you'll have to take some more lessons if you want to, but you don't have to. That was the basic principles behind the two. Now, I know there's a lot of arguments on that, but let's just keep that in mind, that there's really no fundamental difference between the philosophy of Basic and SSD. There are, however, two camps in the topic of both the Basic program and the SSD program. So Camp 1 in the Basic program says callers can call Basic, and if they use it effectively, efficiently, they can very capably entertain the dancers. These callers like the Basic program, they support the Basic program, they use it in many places, they host dances that include Basic, and the dance programs for everyone to dance at, including at festivals. It's easy, it's fun, and it's a good place where the big hall, it allows everybody, the new dancers, to mix with all the other dancers to get together and have fun. Those are the pro basics, and there's a lot of those are few and far between these days. Camp 2 is callers argue that basics are the basics. They are necessary to dancing. They build the foundation on which all other dance programs come from, but in reality, they only give lip service to basics. These callers don't generally call Basic, or in a lot of places, they're unable to call a Basic dance because it's just too difficult for them. Many of them have not called a Basic dance in years or even decades, and most, if they're teaching classes, rush the dancers through the Basic and sometimes through the mainstream to get the dancers to the level that they're calling at, which is generally in many places, and this was the input, probably about 70% plus and higher. We have a Basic class this year, yeah, and they're going to be joining our plus group by the end of the year. That is quite common. Well, the SSD program is not that much different. There's two camps in the SSD program. There are callers that have embraced SSD and are beginning to use it effectively and efficiently. They're having great success putting dancers on the floor, and more importantly, although it's early days, they're having good success keeping them on the floor. These callers teach a program in 12 to 16 weeks. It's a 12-week program, but a lot of callers, they put nights in there, review nights and things. So that's the average of everybody that sent me information is we do SSD, but it takes us 16 weeks. We do it in 12 weeks, and then we dance. 12 to 16 weeks is the average. And it's a pretty standard application of the movements, and there are limited standard application variations. Okay, not these weird and wonderful extended applications. After graduation, there's dancing of some of the extended applications that they already know. And other movements like spin the top, 8-chain-4, they can be introduced as a one-of-night workshop, but they do not become part of the program. They don't get incorporated into every week's dance. The callers that do this support the SSD program. They have events and dances which clearly state what the dancers can expect to dance and at what stage of the program they would be expected to be there if the dance is advertised. So if it's advertised as SSD 6, every dancer that has danced SSD 6 knows, okay, we're going to be doing up to flutter wheel and reverse flutter wheel or whatever the SSD 6 program is. Okay. The second camp of SSD dancers. This is a group that actually fights against SSD strongly and vocally, but they are part of that SSD camp. The argument that they put forward is really, we already have a 50 movement program that's good. It's called basics. And if you can't teach that in 12 weeks, how are you going to teach SSD? Another is, SSD is just a dumbed down version of basic and mainstream without a lot of the good stuff in it that makes it interesting. Another argument is, this means it's too much work. It's too hard to call SSD because, we have to learn a whole new list of calls and we can't use any of the effective stuff without using those mainstream standard movements. The problem is many of those callers are experienced callers. They have a voice that carries and people listen to them, and they actively fight against change simply because they're too old to change, their dancers or their leaders are too old to change, and they don't want to learn something new. They want to get back to where they're comfortable. So those are the two groups, and there's two camps in each group. Unfortunately, there's a third camp. And just out of curiosity, do you see any similarities between those? Very, very much the same. It's the same argument for both. This is where we have problem, the third camp. The third camp is what I call the cheap camp. And it's actually a lot larger than people care to speak about openly. What this is callers that give lip service and they embrace the SSD program. Yeah, come on in, we're going to learn SSD. I'm going to teach you how to dance quickly and everything else. We'll have a lot of fun. Great, wow. And they rev you up. And then they get the dancers filled in the hall and they quickly bring them into their mainstream group, and then they bring them into their plus group to make that mainstream and plus club viable again. What they're doing is they're using SSD as a shortcut method to teach the very basics, get them dancing, hook them in, and then teach the mainstream and plus from very standard applications to quickly get to where the dancers are able to move around, but those dancers never get off this escalator. Some dancers like it, some callers like it. I'm not saying it's good or bad. My personal opinion aside, if it's working for them, I don't care. If dancers are dancing, be happy. I don't care. Whatever works for them, works for them. The problem is, this is not SSD, nor is it basic. It's just a shortcut method. It's just another modified teaching order. Okay, so please don't call it SSD if this is what you're doing. The problem with this is many dancers still like to travel, and these dancers often find that they'll graduate SSD because they'll get the graduation certificate and everything else, and they go dance expecting to dance what they're dancing at their own club. And when they go somewhere else, application variations, extended applications, or anything else, now we're dancing mainstream in our club, we can't dance it. And they get frustrated, they sometimes get angry. Many of them have walked away from classes and actually gone to, some of them thankfully have gone to SSD clubs, and they're dancing SSD. Others have gone back to basic and mainstream clubs to learn basic and mainstream because they just didn't like that. Many of these start SSD classes and they do the SSD, then the mainstream, and the other three basics of the basic program as workshop, and then they become part of the program. Again, all I can say is that is not SSD, that's not SSD support, and in my opinion, that's just laziness. If you want to call basic and mainstream, call basic and mainstream. If you want to call SSD, call SSD. Make a choice. Don't cheat. The reality is whether or not you support the SSD program, SSD is here to stay. It's a recognized program of Caller Lab, so you can either use it or not use it. That's a choice. But do what it's supposed to be. In order to do what it's supposed to be, you have to understand what it is. Okay, so what it is, it's designed to be simpler and easier, a simpler and easier version of square dancing with enough variety to allow the dancers to dance, have fun, be entertained, learn and grow in square dancing without feeling the pressure of going any further. I will say that's exactly the same thing that BASIC was supposed to be, and we'll get into that in a bit. It's designed to learn standard applications that are consistent and give variety without being difficult, so that you could walk in any hall that says, for example, SSD 7 as the program level, and you'll know exactly what and whether you can dance or not. Well, guess what? BASIC program was designed the same way. It's designed to have a core set of movements and an understanding of those movements from standard applications with just a little bit of variation, that's called standard application variation, that dancers are comfortable with and that can be augmented with periodic introduction of extended applications or a different movement being taught as a one-of theme movement that's not part of the program. That's a slight difference from BASIC. Everything else is all the same as BASIC except for when you teach an extended application, it's supposed to become part of the regular repertoire. It's designed to build a community of dancers with a commonality of choreography, camaraderie, companionship that's consistent, and that dancers want to aspire to in order to enjoy that social atmosphere and collectively make a group of people with a common interest. That's square dancing at every level, or it should be. If it's not, you're doing it wrong. And finally, it's a standalone program with a start point and an end point that is completely separate from the current basic, mainstream, and plus programs of square dancing. If you look at it as if it was contra dancing, line dancing, Scottish Highland dancing, or any of the other things like clogging, all of these programs use a lot of the same movements that we do in square dancing, but they are standalone programs. You learn it, then those are the movements that you learn to do that program with. That's it. That's one of the key differences. It ends. Basic ends, but it's a stepping stone for the next one if you want to proceed that way. And it is essentially what BASIC was supposed to be. What it is not, it's not a stepping stone to fast track dancers into mainstream or plus. So if you're using it that way, stop. It's not a program that's here to replace BASIC and mainstream for square dancing. That might happen in the future, I don't know. But that's not what it was designed for. It's not a level on an escalator of capability that has a stigma. Oh, I only dance SSD, sorry, I can't dance mainstream. I only dance SSD, sorry, I can't dance BASIC. I hear that as an argument. It's not a beginner. It's not a I'm not capable. It's not an I'm not ready. It's not a fun program. It's not a you're not a square dancer yet program. It's none of those things. But those are stigmas that dancers today attach to it. Oh, I dance SSD. Oh, you got to come and dance plus. That's the fun program. That's not what SSD is. SSD is a fun program. And if you ever hear a dancer or a caller say, "Come and dance plus," it's the fun program. Tell that caller or that dancer they're an idiot or their caller's doing it wrong, and tell them I said that. Because if you're not having fun dancing at any program, quit. Because you shouldn't be doing it. It's being done wrong. It's not a simple version of basic and mainstream for clubs to teach before graduating mainstream dancers. And it's not a program to push 12 weeks and then add on another 15 weeks of movement before teaching plus. Okay? The best argument, in my opinion, and the only valid argument against SSD is it's designed to be exactly what basic program was intended to be, a fun and easy program where dancers learned and can dance anywhere. And the problem is we couldn't get callers to support that or even call it effectively, so why do we expect anything to change with the SSD program? That's the only argument I've found that is anything that SSD, and that's not a problem with the program. So why should we expect change? Well, the answer is simply because square dancing was broken. And it was not broken by the programs, it was not broken by the movements, it was not broken by the choreography. It was broken by the callers and the leaders teaching the program, trying to turn it into something that it wasn't intended to be. We teach a program and we did not provide anywhere to use it. This is basic. Okay? We didn't recruit dancers up and down, and as we got old, for the most part, who we recruited to got old. The callers and dancers got older, and the people they recruited got older. Until today, most of the dancers still dancing start in their 20 to 40 year range, back many years ago are all in their 65 to 80 year range, and the dancers they're recruiting are all in their 65 to 80 year range, and square dancing overall has become a seniors activity, if not in reality, then in overall perception. We argue incessantly about stupid things, like inappropriate clothing. Oh, you got to wear square dance clothes or you're not allowed to dance. How stupid an argument is that? Yeah. Many callers also try to impress callers or themselves, and they forget about entertaining dancers. This is why square dancing did what it did. There's nothing wrong with choreographic challenges and sea-level dancing and all this other kind of stuff, and if that's what you're into, great. But it'll only last so long unless you keep bringing people in, and you cannot bring people in to do that unless you give them a foundation that's fun, that they want to keep doing it. Many callers don't want to learn the work or do the work required to learn foundations and call foundations because it's difficult to call. Calling plus is easy. Calling basic is hard. Calling SSD is even harder. The reason I say that is if you're a new caller, it's going to be easy for you because you don't have to unlearn, you don't have to get rid of habits, you don't have to learn a new list, you don't have to understand a new teaching order, you don't have to look at the restrictions on how to use those movements or actually go back and pick up the standard application document and say, okay, what is standard application? Is left square through standard application or is that an extended? Well, guess what? That's a standard application. How do you know? It's written in the document. Oh, I didn't know there was a document. Yeah, it's 60 some odd pages. It tells you all this stuff. Callers don't want to do that because it's work. And one of the big things is they have to relearn how to use simple standard applications of music with variety and interest that's entertaining. Okay, Cal Campbell used to say it all the time, different, not difficult. You know, you don't have to be difficult to make it different and interesting. And there's lots of movement in both the basic program and the SSD program to do that. And one of the things that happened is we forgot about the social aspects of square dancing for the sake of that choreographic puzzle. And while back then we had thousands of dancers at conventions and 50 to 100 dancers coming to our regular club nights, that was fine. We could just get further and further and further into the program because we've got all those dancers until those dancers are too far above the basics and they don't want to go back and redo. Well, now I'm dancing plus DBD in advance. Oh, I don't want to start a new basic club. Oh, well, it was fun. I'll tell everybody it was fun. We'll recruit down there. They can have fun and learn what I did. It's not going to work without you. And eventually what happens is these dancers up there find their numbers dwindling, so they go and poach any new dancers to bring them to their fun level, as they call it. And with the exception of a few experienced, dedicated professionals, new dancer classes are relegated to a brand new caller who is generally untrained, unsupported, not really strong-willed enough to prevent that poaching from other clubs or callers or dancers. And the dancers got older and fewer in number, and here we are today. And if you look at many of the SSD clubs today, and those few basic clubs where basic is a program and not a level, guess what? There's a lot of younger dancers there. The basic clubs can do work effectively where the callers let it happen. The SSD clubs can work effectively where the callers let it happen. Now, it's very early days yet, and there's a lot of potential to do something at both the SSD and the basic program. Unfortunately for basics, that ship has pretty much sailed unless everybody has a major mindset, and we've been trying to change that mindset for years. It's just not going to happen. So the question is SSD the answer? I can't say if it is or isn't. It has the potential as a fix to the current basic program, which means that it may or it may not work. If it does work, it's only going to work because of the dedication of callers and leaders that are willing to support it and give it an honest undertaking and a willingness to stick to it and make it what it was supposed to be and what it was designed to be, rather than just using it as another way to get there faster. I'm going to add this on. If callers had done that with the basic program and were willing to give it a fair and honest undertaking and use the program the way it was designed, rather than just as a way to get there faster, the basic program would have worked as a program and not a level that gives that suggestion of we're not capable. Basic would have worked. We wouldn't even be having this discussion. SSD is not better than basic. Basic is not better than SSD. They're not competitors in square dancing unless we as callers or as club leaders make them that. And that's what we have to keep in mind. Okay. Both BASIC and SSD are similar in nature. They're both similar in design. They have similar applications. They use the same definitions, but they only have slight differences in the lists. Hang on a second, my wife's just started the lawnmower. It's a stigma attached to BASIC that those dancers are incompetent. That stigma is attached by snobbish dancers, mainly because we're dragging them up to the plus and the mainstream and everything else to get the halls filled, and they can't dance. I don't know how many times I've heard, oh, the basic, they didn't learn basic and mainstream, we have to go back and teach them. And they said, well, this is no fun anymore, we're going to go learn advanced. And they're bringing every level down, mainly because of what we've done to it. That snobbish dancer level is perpetuated by callers and leaders that just want to keep the status quo. It hasn't helped for more than 20 years that basic and mainstream has been thought of as a quick path to plus. We've all heard that expression, the rush to plus. Those that want to keep this thought process and procedure are not going to save square dancing. And we don't want to recruit them to basic. We don't want to recruit them to SSD. Because quite frankly, they wouldn't come anyway. The truth is, real square dancers don't care. They want to have fun. They want to dance, regardless of the program. And if you didn't tell them that it was a program level and put a graduation, they wouldn't care, because they'll come if they're having fun at the dance. If they can come and they can bring their friends and have fun at the dance. And if they know that in a little while we can do that, or I can help you learn and you can come and join us and have fun at the dance, they'll come to your dance regardless of what program is. If you can't provide that, they're not going to come. So the idea is for everybody to make a choice and then make it work. I urge you all as callers or leaders to stick to your guns. If you're going to call an SSD club, then call an SSD club. Call SSD. That's it. If you're going to call basic, then call basic. Leave the SSD club alone. If you make your club fun and if the dancers want to come to you and learn those other 3 movements of the basic program, they will. If you have a mainstream club, or a plus group, then you have absolutely zero business and zero reason to encourage dancers to learn the rest of the basic and the rest of the mainstream program, nor the plus program. You've got a basic and mainstream group, you've got no reason to go and talk to that SSD club and say, come on out, I'll teach you the rest of the mainstream program, and you can come and dance with me. Stay the hell out of it. Leave the SSD dancers the hell alone and let them dance and have fun at the program that they chose to dance at. When they get exposure and have fun, and if they see if you're doing something right and you're having a lot of fun at your dance, they'll come and find you. And guess what? They'll go and dance at their SSD club, and they'll come and dance at your mainstream club, because it's worth it to them. If you want more dancers in your non-SSD clubs, make them just as much fun. Many callers do this, and many callers are very successful. There are callers that have just basic clubs, and they're very successful. They don't have to poach to survive. And they also have clubs that do basic, mainstream, and plus 3 different nights. And they're very successful, and they don't have to poach to survive because they're doing it right. I strongly recommend do not mix the nights and do not mix the clubs. Do not have an SSD introduction and then your plus club as part of the same group on the same night. Don't mix them. That may be costly monetarily and economically at first, but it's in your best interest, because if you do your job properly, your club will grow. We have a chance to start from scratch here and make this great. Not what it was, because it'll never be what it was. And we don't want that, because what it was didn't work. It was great for a short time and then it died. We want to build it into something that it can be and sustain it. If dancers want to learn basic and mainstream, then there's a caller. Start a basic and mainstream club and teach those programs. If they want to learn plus, then start a basic and mainstream club and teach basic and mainstream first. Remember, each program has a separate identity, and you cannot start a plus club to introduce new dancers to plus. It doesn't work. We've proven that time and time again. Remember, basic is a program by itself. SSD is a program by itself, so teach it as such. Let the dancers dance. Let them enjoy it. give the dancers the options. The ones rushing dancers through programs are not the dancers that are learning. It's other callers and other dancers and other leaders. Don't force it, and whatever you can and whenever you can, stop others from trying to poach or drag dancers up the levels, or let's go dance in the plus hall, we'll dance in the back, don't worry, I'll pull you through. If you ever see that, stop it. In either case, SSD or BASIC give the dancers a place to go and dance, have fun, socialize, be entertained with the program that they have learned to dance. Let them share that joy, let them share that fellowship through that choreography, music, and friendship without pressure. There's only one person that can ruin this, and that's you. And there's only one person that can make it work, and that's you. So in order to deal with this, what we have to look at is we have to look objectively, what's the difference between BASIC and SSD? Now, I want to add a qualifier on here. When I'm comparing BASIC and SSD, the SSD program incorporates most of the BASIC, except for 3 moves, and 6 movements off the mainstream list. Okay, there's a bunch of movements that aren't listed there, but when I get into the choreography, I'm only looking at BASIC program choreography that compares with the SSD program. I'm not looking at the mainstream movements in the SSD program. So just keep that in mind, and I did that specifically for a reason. You'll see that later. So let's compare the programs. In BASIC, well, there's 48 movements. Another 19 that take us up to mainstream according to the current list, and there's variations. In SSD, there's 50 movements, less 15 movements, which take us up to the full mainstream and BASIC program. Okay? So there's really not much difference. They're both 50 movement programs, roughly. The program lists are already established for both programs. There's a teaching order for both programs. The difference is the BASIC teaching order has been modified and is constantly being modified by callers to make it more comfortable for callers, not necessarily the dancers. Betsy Gata has a modified teaching order that she uses, which is great and is progressive and it's logical, but other callers have modified their teaching order to suit them because that's the way their choreography is written. Okay? SSD has a teaching order that's established and it's fixed. Okay? Unfortunately, some callers are already modifying that to suit their needs. We're never going to stop that. The BASIC has a duration, if you're teaching BASIC, just BASIC, of 20 weeks. That's the recommended time for teaching. Okay, that includes 3 nights, which are just party and review nights. So if we look at that, oh, great. Now we're at 17 weeks. The SSD program is a 12-week program. Most of the callers that I've talked to doing that, except for one group that does it in 12 weeks, uses 14 to 16 weeks because what they're doing is they add 2 review party nights and a graduation night. So it's usually around 14 to 16 weeks. The BASIC program was designed to have 1 or 2 classes per year. That's dancing BASIC. Later on, we incorporated BASIC and mainstream as a program and limited it to 1 intake per year. But BASIC was designed to have 1 or 2 classes per year. That gave them time to learn, time to dance, time to have fun, time to recruit and bring your friends in so we can do it all over again. The SSD program is set up to do possibly 3 to 4 classes per year, where you come in, you learn standard applications, you have a place to dance. You combine that, bring your friends in, teach them, you've got a place to dance. At this point, there's really not a lot of differences between the 2 programs. The danceability is good. It's got varied. In BASIC, it's varied with standard and extended applications that become part of the program. In SSD, the choreography is good. It's interesting. It's varied with primarily standard applications and some standard application variation. That's the danceability of it. The choreography itself in BASIC is interesting. It's varied. It's dynamic. Standard application variations, some extended applications, and once taught, all of those become part of the program. This is where the first real digression between SSD and BASIC happens. The choreography in SSD is interesting, it's varied, it's dynamic, it's standard application with some standard application variations. Up to there, it's exactly the same. The difference is most extended applications are workshopped, and they're not part of the regular program. You workshop them if you're going to use them. That's really the only difference at that point. So far, not much difference. Here's where it gets different. The primary liability of both programs is the callers and the leaders. Callers, at BASIC, callers willing to call and use the program require hard work to be effective, and at this level, to keep the material danceable. And the problem is, callers get bored before the dancers do. At the SSD level, callers willing to call and use the program effectively is a problem. It requires hard work to use a program with effective innovation while keeping its standard application only. And the same problem. Callers get bored before the dancers do. Joni was saying that earlier in the discussion. She calls her dancers that are doing this at the SSD, they like one figure only. They like to have that repeat. They like the comfort. They love the familiarity of it. A lot of callers get bored with that. So from all of that information, we get what we call a survivability assessment. For BASIC, the survivability assessment is poor. And the reason is callers don't want to call BASIC. We've created this stigma of a level being a class of dancer. Oh, you're a lower class than I am. You know, my nose is in the air. Rather than it's a fun program for all dancers. Very few callers today are successful at BASIC. There are some that are. Fewer clubs exist, and the activity in square dancing as a whole does not support the BASIC program. And I say that without reservation. There may be a few odd places where they'll have a BASIC dance. Helen has a BASIC club in Sweden. There's a few BASIC clubs in New Jersey. There's a couple in California. But they're few and far between, and they're not locally or regionally supported in most parts. For SSD, the survivability right now is fair. This will, however, only work if, and it will survive if, existing callers and dancers accept SSD for what it is, and not as a feeder mechanism or a short-term gain to get dancers back into that slow death of the activity that we have now. Some clubs exist, and in some places there's actually regional support for SSD and whole organizations that, wait, we're going to do SSD only. We've got 4 or 5 different clubs. We're all going to do SSD, and we're going to have SSD as a program level. We're not going to have BASIC. We will have mainstream. So they're going SSD, mainstream, and so on. That's their choice, and it's working for them. And lastly is the caller and the dancer capability. Callers have trouble calling just BASIC. We see that at almost every caller school where they get up and they do their tip, great, and then the callers and teachers say, right, and from now on we're only going to call at the mainstream level or at the BASIC level. And they get up and do another tip, and those callers cannot call a BASIC or a mainstream tip because they just haven't done it. They don't know the list. They're not ready to do that, and that happens very, very frequently. Fantastic plus callers, fantastic mainstream callers, but they have trouble doing BASIC because they've never looked at it that way, and they don't want to change. Okay, it's subject to the capability of the caller to use that material, and if it's effective and used properly, it sets a good foundation for the subsequent programs. That's what BASIC was designed for. At the SSD, the same problem happens. Callers have trouble calling just SSD because it feels like mainstream and it's hard to let go. Once you finish the SSD program, with the exception of a few movements like, oh, I can't call spin the top, or I can't call 8 chain 4, you know, it feels like you're calling a mainstream dance, and it's hard to let go, and you keep dropping those movements down there. It, you know, oh, I called a do paso, oh my goodness, oh. It's hard. Dancers who dance SSD are subject to the capability of the caller, the same as at BASIC, and the caller's ability to use that material. But the difference is the dancers generally have no problem at SSD at any level. Dancers at BASIC do have problems going from one BASIC club to another because the standard of what it is different. What I may call a BASIC dance, Bob Elling might call, well, that's a really heavy DBD BASIC. Or go into Helen's club in Germany and say, or in Sweden, sorry, Helen, and she'll say, well, we dance BASIC here, and she's calling. Wow, can't do that. It's not an uncommon story, and there's a very common one where they had a big name American call, a couple of big name American callers that came over to the festivals in Europe, and one of the halls was BASIC, and they had to actually go out and get some of the local callers to come in and call the BASIC program because the callers could not call a BASIC dance. And these are big name callers. That happens. That's not the dancer problem, that's the caller problem. So what does this mean in simple and practical terms? Well, first of all, the BASIC program and the SSD program are not really all that different. The only movements on the BASIC program that are not on the SSD program are walk around your corner, seesaw, and do paso. That's it. That's basic. I'm not using any of the mainstream movements, but in the BASIC program, those three movements. And the reality is, when was the last time, other than that open figure on a singing call, that you used any of those movements? Very, very rare exceptions, and few callers will use that movements. And usually the only time you'll see it is if somebody's got the singing call El Paso City. It's not everybody, but it's quite common. As far as the mainstream movements go that are on the SSD program, there's 6. And of those 6, 4 can be and generally are prompted at the basic program level when you're starting to introduce the teaching. In a basic class or in a basic mainstream group, if you're trying to teach something, slide through being the classic example. Slide through is a mainstream movement, but it's taught as, okay, everybody star through. Okay, now put your hands behind your back. Look at it. Okay, now star through. Don't use your hands. We're teaching body flow and all. Hang on 1 second, please. Okay. Now, I use that movement specifically because slide through is an anomaly. Okay, it's an anomaly because it's usually incorporated in every basic program early on by any caller that appreciates things like body flow and hand availability. That's why it's in the second night of the SSD program. Not the first. I think in the notes I put the SSD 1, but it's actually SSD 2, and that's because star through, star through, star through, star through, right and left through, star through. Those kinds of things are uncomfortable. So slide through is usually taught early, so that you've got a hands free. One movement that is difficult: centers in. Cast off 3/4. In a lot of cases at the SSD program, that's prompted as wheel around and 1/4 more, or trade and hinge. Hinge isn't on there. Trade and 1/4 more. Even wheel away from the center is sometimes used. I've heard that came in some of the choreography. We want you to do instead of wheel left or right, I want you to wheel away from the center and then bend the line. That's how they're getting past the cast off 3/4 and introducing the body flow.
Mel?
Tag the line. Yeah.
The trade would be just 1.5 a trade, not trades and 1/4 more.
Yeah. Like I said, these are just, I'm only using the prompting that has been sent in with me. I'm going to be looking at some of that choreography, but that's a very valid point, and it's a much better way of expressing it. Trade 1.5. Tag the line. Tag the line or half tag, which is done at, when you're introducing and teaching that. Lines, pass through. Everybody, face the center of your line. Do a double pass through. Oh, now we've introduced that at basic, and we're doing that at basic. Oh, guess what? We're doing tagged line. Oh, pass through. Everybody, face the center of your line. Centers, pass through, make a wave. Well, we're now at basic. We're not doing mainstream, but that's SSD 8, I think.
But it's even easier since the tag formations vary from one extent to the other extent. You could say everybody face the center, and whatever numbers you extend, you can achieve any tag.
Yeah, I'm stopping you there because I have to look at basic and SSD. I'm only looking at that. I'm not doing 3/4 or 1/4 tag because they're not in the SSD program at all. They're in the mainstream program, but they're not in the SSD, and that's why I've taken them up there, but you're absolutely correct. Okay. The fold family is another one. Fold and cross fold, that's a little harder to prompt, but scoot back. In a basic class, a lot of them will prompt extend, turn through, and extend, or step ahead, right arm turn, step ahead, remake your wave. We're prompting it at basic, and that is also at SSD 8. Recycle is one of the anomalies. Unfortunately, that still gets prompted as centers, U-turn back, wheel and deal, which is SSD 7. That's something that has to be fixed, but that body flow is often used, and as long as it's varied, it's not a problem, and it's used quite a bit at basic. Unfortunately, some callers I know still use that as a way to teach recycle, which is wrong. Anyway, most callers I know have introduced dancers into the dance action by prompting the body flows to introduce the combinations to dancers before they teach a movement. And the example I gave earlier was star through with no hands. You teach them that, and then you teach them the movement, or you get them through that. The problem apparently is not then with the programs, either the basic program or the SSD program, because they're very similar. The problem is about expectations that callers have and the expectations that the dancers have. And those two things don't always line up. So if we were to wrap up these problems, there are truthfully many problems still with the SSD program and the basic program that are going to lead to the survivability of either. Do any of these things sound familiar? Has anybody ever heard from a caller, I can break down any floor just using the basic program? Has anybody ever heard that? A caller say that? I have. I've heard callers say that with the SSD. I can break down a floor just calling SSD. Doesn't matter if it's a challenge floor. The question is, why would you? Why did that thought process ever come up in the first place? There's comments, oh, the dancers can't dance simple choreography. We're getting dancers in our plus group and we have to reteach them basics and mainstream because they didn't learn how to dance. Now SSD's making it even dumber. How am I going to have to teach them everything? Well, the whole point is you're not supposed to. That's not what they're there for. They're not there to come learn plus. Oh, they're always in class teaching and learning. You know, they're always in class mode. Well, that's because we put them in class mode. The problem is not the program. The problem is our expectations. The dancers are getting bored, so I have to give them more. Who told you the dancers are getting bored? Joni, I loved what you said earlier with your group. They want one figure that's comfortable that they can dance to in a singing call. They want that repetition. They want this. They want a little bit of variety. They want to know what it is in a patter call, but they want that continuity. They want that success. They want that. They're not getting bored. You're getting bored as a caller. No one supports basic and mainstream around here. Is that a problem with the program? Is that a problem with the basic program? Is that a problem with the mainstream program? Is that a problem with the SSD program? No. That's a problem with us as leaders. It's too costly to separate mainstream from plus or SSD from our club level. We can't financially support it. Well, here's some news for you. You can't financially support doing what you're doing now. You may have had 20 squares on the floor. You've got 2. You cannot pay for the hall and still dance your plus dance and expect to get it there and bring new dancers in because they're not going to stay. You want to make it economically viable? Change your mindset. And there's just nowhere for dancers to go and dance. That's a big problem. At the basic level and at the mainstream level, or sorry, at the basic level and the SSD level, that is a big problem. But why is there no place for them to go and dance? Because the people that are leading say, oh, well, we can't afford it. We want to make sure our plus dancers or our advanced dancers and whatnot are happy. Keep them happy. I think they should be happy. They're only going to be here for another 10 years and then they're all going to die. Sorry, but somebody's got to say it. There's no problem with either programs, either basic or SSD. The problem is elsewhere, and that everything else is with leaders and callers that don't want to embrace anything new, such as actually calling a basic program and supporting it, or actively calling SSD and supporting it. That's where the problems exist. So briefly, let's just look at some choreography, or talk choreography. Things that are needed are caution and common sense at all program levels, and that boils down to caller judgment. Callers have to call for the dancers to have fun and enjoy it. That's going to make it enjoyable for them, and it's hard work to keep it simple and interesting because the fundamentals of calling and dancing apply equally to both programs. It's a lot of work, and it will either be easier for new callers because they don't have to unlearn, or experienced callers have to take the time and the effort to put into it. Otherwise, neither one is going to work. The Caller Lab definitions, rules, guidelines, conventions for BASIC and SSD are exactly the same. The only difference are in extended applications being workshopped instead of being incorporated as part of the regular program. The principles of smooth dancing and calling, moving to the music, kinesthetics, all of that are identical for SSD or BASIC. It's a dance. Let them dance. Callers that use the programs correctly teach the dancers to move with the music and to use the beats of the music. There's 64 beats of music to a phrase. They've got 64 beats of dancing. Too many times we have changed this in the past that callers will give the dancers 30 beats of choreography to do 64 beats of music. That's great if you're teaching a movement, but once they've learned it, get them dancing to the beat, and you'll find they'll have infinitely more success. Stop treating them like babies. They're not babies. Okay, callers at BASIC and SSD will have to check and double check their work and begin to write and develop choreography. Borrowing or researching choreography into your repertoire, that choreography will have to be checked over and over and over again, because these lists are already written, and you're going to find things that are half of the SSD program, half of your mainstream program. Guess what? Half of your mainstream program is the SSD program. Or you may have to make a modification, A, B, and C. SSD might use the movement slide through. Guess what? Well, that's mainstream. I can't use that. Well, you have to make those changes. These principles apply to all program levels, but it boils down to one thing, and that's having respect for your dancers. After all, they're the reason you're there in the first place. They're only going to come to you if you give them a product that they want to buy and they want to enjoy. And if you cannot provide that product, I wouldn't go. I don't want to go and buy, dessert that is tastes of ipecac and makes me vomit, or makes me have a sour face and I can't eat it. I wouldn't buy that product. Why would I buy a product that is advertised as entertaining, fun, and moving to the music and dancing and having sociability, and I go there and it's not providing it? If I can't provide everything that I'm saying this program is supposed to be, then I shouldn't be there doing it. And your dancers aren't going to come to it. They're only going to come if you give them the product that they want. So in conclusion, the reason square dancing is failing, it's not dancing, it's not the programs, it's not basic and mainstream, it's not the escalator, it's not any of that kind of stuff. The problem is callers and leaders. Callers and leaders, why we need to change how we do things. We have to change how we do things. Callers and leaders are inflexible and rigid. And I say callers and leaders, and I mean not just square dance callers, but also leaders, club leaders, executives, things like that. The people that are saying to the callers, yeah, I want you to teach the SSD program, but I want them to be able to dance with the Plus Club by the end of the year. That's not a program. I'd walk away from that. I'd say, you know what, you're going to have to find another caller that can do it. Good luck. I'm going to start my own club. Callers and leaders are the problem. Why? Because we have technical jigsaw puzzle catering to the elite of dancing, or catering to callers, trying to impress callers, rather than getting dancers on the floor and letting them have a good time. Callers and leaders are the problem. Why? Because dancers can't dance like they used to. Well, they can't dance like they used to because we don't teach like we used to. We don't teach basic and let them dance basic. And then if they want, they can go to mainstream. Over the last 40 years, we've pushed all this stuff into one program. We don't give them time to enjoy it. And we don't give them time to dance it. So why should they dance it like they used to? Callers and leaders are the problem. The only reason why SSD and basic will work or will not work is if the callers and the leaders take the time to put the effort in to make it work. We all agree that the current normal, what we have now as a status, can't survive. So we have to have a mindset change and a collective strength of will to do what is required. So I ask the question again, is SSD the answer? I don't know. Okay. I don't call SSD. I don't call basic right now. This is just an objective analysis of all the material that everybody's been sending in, and I thank you for that, and all the choreography that's been sent in. I do know that SSD is one answer that has a potential, but then again, doing basic right is also an answer and has a potential. We, sitting in this room here, or callers and leaders as club leaders, we are the only people that are going to be the instruments of change that can fix this problem. I'm encouraging you, don't be the instrument of repair. Don't try and fix square dancing. Don't try and fix basic and mainstream. Don't try and fix the programs. You can't. They're broken. It's dead. Bury them, forget them. Be the instrument of change. And I say that because SSD, if you wanted to do SSD, that's new. If you wanted to do basic and just basic and call basic, that's new. Okay? I know the program's been there forever, but it's new. You've got to turn it back to what it is, not what it had become. So get rid of what it had become. It's a brand new entity. SSD is here to stay, but only time is going to tell if it's going to work, or if we will do to it what we did to the BASIC program. Only time is going to tell that. And that decision is not mine, it's yours. So, before we look at any choreography, please remember this program did not compare the movements of the SSD program and the movements of the BASIC program. What it did was look at the intent, the action, and the consequences of those two programs, hopefully to allow an objective decision-making capability, or at least open the door to honest thought dialogue about this. This is something that should have happened a long time ago. There's attached choreography in the notes and whatnot, which is all SSD choreography. And with the exception of the movement slide through, it only uses basic level choreography as well. It doesn't use the SSD mainstream movements. So if you want all of that, you're going to have to add that in yourself. It's not intended as an alternative, but only as an augmentation of existing basic choreography that's been looked at and usable from the BASIC program. And once again, I thank everybody for sending that in. Much, much appreciated. It's collated. There's about 20 some odd pages of just choreography using the BASIC program. So I'm just going to quickly look at the comments in case hopefully that person asked if they could record his recording. Simon, SSD does have 7 mainstream move, including recycle, not so simple. Absolutely correct, Simon. There are a number of mainstream movements in the SSD program. I wasn't actually looking at that, I was just comparing that, just so that we could look at what is the choreographic differences between the two. But SSD is a good program, BASIC is a good program. And you are absolutely correct, recycle is not so simple because of the fold action and the cross fold action. Getting them into flows and turns, that's easy enough to do. Mike has said, dancers can ruin it as much as us. Absolutely. But if you get a whole bunch of new dancers and you set the template for them and what the activity is and what's to be expected, as with any activity, chances are your dancers aren't going to ruin it. They're going to be enjoying what you provide. The only dancers that are going to ruin it are dancers that have already got preconceived notions about what is and what isn't and what it should be. And you as a leader need to be able to stop that. That's it for the comments. Let's open up the floor. I'd like to start, if I could, with Bob Elling, because if Bob is still here. Are you still here, Bob? Yeah. And the reason I wanted to start with Bob is Bob has bought probably about 200 different record labels, and he's putting down a whole bunch of records, and he has solely focused on the SSD program for a lot of the releases to support this, and there's a lot of drive behind it. And from what I'm hearing, he's having a fair bit of success with promoting the SSD, and I think they're putting a lot of material out there. And I think Simon and Susie, you were helping out with some of that choreography and writing that. Was that you? Yeah. So Bob, if you'd like to start up, and then Joni, I think you had your hand up, did you? So we'll go to Bob and then Joni. You need to unmute, Bob. You need to unmute.
Yep, there we go. Had to find the icon. I just was reading some material. I don't know if it's what you sent me or not, but I just could not believe the first figure that I read, or one of the first figures that I read. And it was heads lead right, touch a quarter, scoot back, split circulate, scoot back, split circulate, hinge. Would you write or do a doodle on that and see what the body flow is?
Okay, I want everybody to just put their finger in the middle of their screen and do this. And
we're calling the older dancers. If one of those boys or girls do not get dizzy and fall down, you're lucky.
Yeah, this is exactly what I was talking about with callers, and now that is what Bob gave as an example. That is in the SSD program. That's also in the mainstream program because scoot back. But that boils down not to dancer problem, not to a program problem. That boils down to callers having the fundamentals of movement mechanics. You've got a right-hand flow, a right-hand sharp turn, a right-hand sharp turn, a right-hand sharp turn. So you've got, for one of the dancers, you've got touch a quarter, you've got a trade, you've got another trade, you've got another trade, you got a 90-degree hinge, and you've got a trade, and then you've got another trade. So with the exception of stepping forward and doing a trade and stepping forward in the scoot back, you've done 1, 2, 3, 4.5 right-hand turns on the spot.
Let's put it that way. An ice princess will love it.
Yes. I've loved that. I heard that expression for the first time in the last Zoom session, that in Germany they call choreography like that the ice princess choreography. Because that's basically what you're doing, is that pirouette sinking. But it's absolutely crucial that at every level, basic or SSD, or every level beyond that, that you understand as a caller the fundamentals of movement mechanics, kinesiology, hand availability, and body flow. We get wrapped up in choreography, making the puzzle work, that we forget that people actually have to try and dance this.
Now, from earlier discussion, it's appropriate at SSD to call partner trade once and a half?
Yes.
Okay.
At SSD, that's called a standard application variation. And you're introducing the and a half earlier on with do si do once and a half with the pause, the pass through, which is very common in singing calls. But if you're going to call a partner trade once and a half, you've introduced that half flow, because you do a couples trade once and a half, you do a circulate once and a half, and you've introduced that flow. You don't just call it cold, but that concept will have already been introduced by the time you get to the partner trade, if you're using the program properly. And
okay.
That's a standard application variation, which is acceptable in the SSD program.
Well, I just want everybody to be aware that, if you do an SSD program, that your plus dancers who come to that dance are going to break down right away. And it's not just partner trade once and a half. Do a reverse wheel around. Yep. And it's just the whole list was designed to do a few variations that the caller who wrote the list wanted to do to make it different. And it's not compatible. So, like you say, it's a standalone program, but it's not compatible.
I have to interject on that before I get to Joni. Pass through, reverse wheel around will break down a lot of plus floors and advanced floors. Alaman left turn partner right to a wrong way thar will break down most plus and advanced floors, depending on what part of the state you're in. That is not a problem with the program. That is a problem with callers using the programs effectively and using those movements, because nobody has written choreography for reverse wheel around or wrong way thars and things like that. I know here in Australia, a wrong way thar is used not frequently, but it is used. But I also know that reverse wheel around, if you don't hear at least 2 or 3 of those and wheel arounds at a dance, chances are somebody's going to come up to that caller and say, "Oh, you're taking it easy on people." It's a very common thing.
Well, I'm just saying what it is.
Oh no, you're absolutely correct. But again, that goes back to that last slide. The problem is not the program. The problem is us. And you're absolutely correct. And sorry, go ahead.
I called a dance last night for a plus club that wants to be more or less DBD, but because it was the day after Thanksgiving, most of the club was going to be gone, and there was enough club dancers to put together a square, so they decided to have a dance, and we had 2 squares of visitors. Mostly from the SSD or not being able to do anything above mainstream. Some of them wanted to review, so I had a couple teaching tips. And for the rest of the night, I said, okay, we've done enough teaching. Now we're going to play. And I called SSD basically, or basic. And I guess it was, yeah, because one of my favorite calls is walk and dodge. And I teach that in the third week of class for a very definite reason.
Yeah,
You know, and the reason is, for all of you that were wondering, what is he talking about? I don't do walk and dodge. I do facing walk and dodge. It's boy walk, girl dodge. Because that dodge action, they have to learn how to do when you do a boys run, girls run. There's a runner and a dodger. That's the best way I find to describe that dodging action, and it accelerates their learning process by being familiar with it. Plus, when you teach walk and dodge with one person facing out, how many guys have taught walk and dodge, boy walk and the girl dodge, and have that girl do a U-turn back to face in? They're always going to do it, unless you start by teaching them how to dodge from facing, boy walk, girl dodge. That's where they wanted to go in the first place. So why don't I design it so I call it the way they want to do it? And after they get comfortable with the dodge action and realize what it is, I can do it with them facing out. That's fine. But again, it's a precursor to before I teach a run. I teach the people how to do a dodge.
And that's fine, Bob. When you're doing that, what we're talking about is modifying the teaching orders.
Yeah, but
in this example, though, it's a specific thing that you have your plus group that wanted DBD. You had visitors, which were SSD. You called SSD. The plus dancers were having trouble with it. That's not a problem. That's not a problem with the programs. That's not a problem with what the movements on the list. That's a problem with callers and leaders and the expectations of what we've built in over the years. I'm going to stop you there. We'll come back to that.
Wait, just one quick thing. Quick thing. The SSD people couldn't do the reverse wheel around or the partner trade once and a half.
Okay, then that happens.
And
that's not a problem. That's not a problem with the program. That's a problem because it has.
Sure it is. I know it's a problem with the callers.
It's a problem with the callers. And that's the only way that we're going to fix it. I'm going to move on to Joni. She's been waiting very patiently.
Yeah, no problem.
But you're quite right, Bob.
There's another big difference between BASIC and the SSD program in that, let's say I have three different clubs teaching BASIC. And I, as a person, after about 5 weeks, said, oh, I want to try this other person. I'm going to walk into his class, and because he has a totally different teaching order than my other class that I possibly was taking, I might know more than the people on the floor, wondering, why isn't he calling this? I might know less than the people on the floor because he called in a different order. And what I like about the SSD program is, if you know that I'm teaching lesson 6, you already have gone through 1 through 5, you know that I'm not going to call anything except to teach lesson 6. You know all the calls that have already been before. So there's nothing surprising, nothing new. Okay? As opposed to a basic class, I walk in, the person who's taught was to say do paso already, and I have not learned that yet. Okay? Yeah. So that's something else. Also, when you said how many people tried to, have been broken down, when we were traveling, we hit Tennessee, we hit a club, the caller did not know us, but found out that we knew how to dance C3A, okay, nice tall level. He was doing everything he could in his arsenal to try to break us down, to say, oh, these people don't know how to really dance.
Can't understand a word she's saying.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're broken. You have to listen carefully, but if you speak fast, you've got a low bandwidth.
I'm
there's a bit of
sorry.
drive.
I will talk. I will try. I'm a fast talker. When I was traveling and we landed in a state where this caller did not know who I was, but found out that I was a challenge dancer, did everything in his arsenal to break us down. And he couldn't, but what he was doing was breaking down his club. And the people there were getting very upset because they could not dance the calls that he was trying to call that was trying to break us down. He was trying to prove in his own mind that challenge dancers could not dance the basics.
Yeah. You've said two things there, Joni, which one I put into the slide already, actually both of these. At basic, the teaching order is established, but it's modified very, very often. Bob gave us a very good example of that with the walk and dodge. Betsy Gotta, when she was here, talked about the modified teaching order that she uses. It's actually recognized by Collar Lab, which is interesting because they put out a recommended teaching order, then they put out a recommended modified teaching order, and then callers use their own teaching order. When I was learning to call in Germany, we had basics was this, and here was the teaching order, and mainly it was rigid because it was translated, and that's what they worked on. This is what the standards were. This is why the level was there, why the program was there. And before any kind of dance, they would agree, right, we are using the basic program. In 4 weeks, we're going to have this dance. This is the movement number 20. Everybody has to be able to do up to movement number 20. We're not doing anything beyond that movement. Nothing's going to be called up, and they would have a basic dance. They would set those things as a specific standard. That kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore. But what you're saying, so modifying teaching list.
That is not correct. Excuse me.
When I started,
yeah,
that was back in the 80s when I was calling.
It still is there with the student parties and the student dances, and it is signed and marked on the flyers for every dance where students are invited or basic dances are invited, up
Perfect.
to what level and call. That is still valid.
Yeah, well, that's great because, and what's nice about that is they know that every caller or every dancer in ECTA all across Europe can look at that and say, right, here's a student dancer, here's a new dancer dance. I know exactly what to expect. They set the expectations and they meet those expectations and they give their variety and creativity within the restrictions that they put on. Most places don't do that, and that's one of the problems that you were having. SSD has a fixed program teaching order, but from some of the stuff that has already been sent in to me, just in preparing for this, some callers are actually modifying that teaching order already because it's easier for them.
Yes.
And we're going to start seeing that. And this is what I said. This is not a problem with the SSD program. It's not a problem with the basic program. This is a problem with callers and leaders. As to the second one that you mentioned, I will just go down to that. These problems exist. I can break down any floor at SSD. I can break down any challenge floor just using SSD Pro. My question to you is, oh, look at that. That caller was not calling for his dancers. That caller was calling for himself and forgetting all about the dancers on the floor, trying to break down your square. And, quite frankly, I would have got up and walked out and says, listen, can you call something we can dance or I'd like my money back? And I'm one of those people that actually has the cojones to walk up to a caller and say, you're calling a basic dance, but you're calling, plus movements. I didn't come here to dance relay the deucey left-handed at a basic dance. So I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong hall. Can I get my money back, please?
I did go up to this particular caller and say, I don't believe that you're going to be able to break me down. You are upsetting your club. I need you to stop. So I did say that.
Oh, good for you.
Joe Ubelak, where are you, Joe? And then we'll come back to you, Bob. You have to unmute yourself, Joe. There you go.
Okay, how's that? Are you able to hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I just have a few points. After nearly 60 years of calling and 40 years of teaching other callers, I think I have a few points here to be made. To be successful, one of the biggest things is we're going to have to really advertise a lot when we're doing SSD dances, because that way these dancers, they know where to go. They know they can go somewhere. It may be far in between dances for people to go, but if they know where they are and they can get out and dance and have fun, then it's going to help the success of the program. Part of the problem with the complexity of calls and whatnot, too many callers don't dance. They don't dance enough. They don't dance at the level they ought to be dancing, and they don't realize how interesting simple calls can be. Now I call up through the C3 A and B, so I love choreography. I love technical puzzles, but that's for them. Okay, for dancers at the newer levels and socializing, we need to be simple. We need to be less complicated. I found out by dancing on Zoom. I learned a heck of a lot dancing mainstream and basic or plus dancing on Zoom with just my wife and a phantom couple more about choreography and flow and how easy it is to call these levels. Just make a list. Okay, that's one thing. So get out and dance, guys. Recycle, hard to teach or learn. Two ladies chain is hard for a non-dancer, Mm-hmm. So if they know how to cross-fold, they'll be able to do the call pretty well. Any of these things, if you take your time to teach them casual, I won't say casually, but not in a rushed thing, to try to just get them through the calls. Introduce socializing while they're dancing. Make some fun of it. We've got to be entertainers, guys. If you got into it because you love the choreography, fine. But learn some choreography or some entertainment features that will help your teaching and help your calling, the whole works. Paul Briscoe has a whole lot of information about that. Go on to the Barry Wanson's notes. He has a lot of that printed up. Part of our problem, and I think Mel, you addressed it, we create learners more than we create dancers. The dancers, when they each week they come and they go, oh, what's new? What's new? Then they get out to their first dance and they come away going like, I didn't learn anything new tonight. Well, it's because the caller didn't call anything a little different. Just go the other direction once in a while. Okay. That was one of the last things. A big part of the program too, to be successful, we say dancers can be a problem, is you got to train your angels. You've got to have a meeting with them ahead of time, because the existing dancers, they love what they're doing. And if they're doing plus and they're angeling, they're going to say, oh, wait till you get to plus. Wait till you get to teacup chain. Wait, and they make it like the next program is better, more fun. So you have to get the angels, tell them.
Rein that in very quickly. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and, tell them how you want them to operate, but they can't teach during a square, that kind of a thing. That's the angels. And then, okay. And it's not really that hard to call basic, even if you don't teach it. Put your list up. Program your dances. Okay, tip 1, I'm going to call these calls just easy. Tip 2, I'm going to feature Ferris wheel. No, have them Ferris wheel from one direction, have them Ferris wheel from the other direction. Many dance callers do not do that. Is that hard? Nah, not at all. So, get out there, guys and gals, dance, learn from others. If you want to know how to be entertaining, go to callers who are popular and put on a good dance. You aren't stealing their material. It won't come across the same way. If you use exactly what I use for fun and games, it's going to be yours. It won't be me. It'll be your personality putting it across. But if you're not having fun, they're not having fun. Okay?
I've got
Where's my
three
case?
things that I'd like to. Yeah, I've got Daniel up, and then I've got Bob up. But there's three things I want to address there, Joe.
Yeah.
One is a clarification. When in the session I said recycle is hard to teach. Recycle is not hard to teach. What I was saying was, by comparison, using basic movements only to establish the flow, recycle would be a hard one because you don't learn cross fold and you don't learn fold. Those come on later. They're part of the mainstream program. So that's hard to teach without having taught those particular movements. It's hard to prompt because there's nothing in basic that you're prompting a cross fold.
I got one.
Wheel and deal.
Yeah, I know. Other than centers, you turn back, wheel and deal. And
Yeah. Other than centers, you turn back. It would be half of a trade, which is a hinge. We don't have to hinge there, but half of a trade you could call. You could call a box circulate and face, and there you are.
Yeah, I know. But again, that's a flow issue, and you're absolutely correct. But as I said, it gets a bit interesting to teach. Second one, what was it? You had said, pass. Anyway, gone. Third one is I happily steal material. I love to go and I love to dance. I saw Alan Kerr nodding his head. Callers don't get out and dance enough. Yeah. If I get a chance to go and dance, I love to go and dance. And I'm notorious for always having a little notebook and a pad and pen in my pocket because I happily steal material. I have no reservations about that whatsoever. And I have stolen a lot of material from both you and from Anne, for that matter. So,
long as you give us credit, so we get paid our royalty checks.
No. Oh, hell no. I forgot what the third point was, but I'll pass on my come. Daniel, you had your hand up, and then Bob Elling.
Yeah, I just, something that was kind of pertinent was a couple of weeks ago, we actually had the first halfway dance that we've had in this area for probably 10 or 20 years. And I ended up being one of the newer callers, because I've only called 12 years as opposed to the people who've been calling 30 and 40. I ended up as the MC and had to arrange everything. So anyway, we decided we'd stop at basic and try to have a couple of announced basic one tips. And I can tell you that trying to find somebody who will call basic one, I ended up calling one, and I thankfully had a caller that had like 50 years experience that he agreed to call one. But the thing about it is, the callers, they weren't always that happy because they couldn't call mainstream. But we had 116 dancers, 35 of them were brand new. We had 5 callers, of which I think I was the newest one at 12 years. And, callers weren't all having that much. We kind of had fun, but the dancers had more fun than I'd seen anybody have at a dance for years. And it was probably the most fantastic dance I saw for dancers in since probably several years before COVID. So, basic will work, but boy, it would have been a lot easier if I could have said, we'll call everything from say SSD 8 and below or something like that, because the teaching order, which, in basic, obviously, probably all the callers have actually taught some mainstream by the time they get to the end of basic anyway. But when you're planning a dance, you can't say, well, we're going to teach, it's going to be basic plus these mainstream calls or whatever. So you kind of have to stick with something. And SSD, you have to stick with it, but it gives you so many more calls that you can kind of do stuff with and have, it's easier to call from that standpoint. When you want to do like resolve a square or something like that. I mean, that was a real, I ended up being one of the guys that did basic one, and it took me like a month to sit down and write down what was basic one and what I couldn't call and all that, and come up with enough modules. And I, in the end, I did fine, but it took me about a month of working on it before I could come up with them, and not mess up and call something in basic 2. Or find some way to get it done without making a mistake and calling something above. It looked like it would have been easy. I went and looked at the SSD program just because I'm kind of curious about it. It looks like it'd be a great way to teach, or a teaching order. I'm not in our area. We've got, like I said, I'm the newest caller at 12 years. Everybody else has got at least 20 years or more. And so it's not like anybody's going to do the SSD because I think it's a great program. So, and I'm not sure that I'm really comfortable with stopping at the 50, but I think it's a great teaching order for the first 50, is my opinion
One
of
of
it.
the things that I'm just interrupting you there for a second, Daniel. You hit the head on one thing that what Joe was saying, and I was the third thing I wanted to say. When Joe was talking about adding variety and interest, Bob Elling asked, is 1.5 on the SSD program? Yes, it is, but so is from a wave or a left-hand wave swing through girls run. Now we're in a standard couple, but we're circulating counterclockwise, a Ferris wheel that way, or a Ferris wheel with the boys going in the middle, or a Ferris wheel with the girls going in. Those are standard application variations, and all of those are perfectly fine in the SSD program. Doing bits and pieces of, Ferris wheel 6 7/8, but the center girls tar a quarter and then run left, and the boys finish your part of Ferris wheel while the girls fold into the left and slide over 2 places, that's not SSD. That may be basic, but you'd break down any floor on that because it's called stupidity. And that's, if a caller ever did that, the caller's trying to break down a floor. So there's lots of material there. The other thing that Joe hit, and you hit on the head, and Joni, are you still with us, Joni? Joni might have gone. That Joni said earlier, when you're calling a program, I know Ann used to do this. I don't know if you do this, Joe, but if it's a multi-level program, she'd print out the list. So you'd have, if it's basic 1, basic 2, main, you'd have that list printed out in large form on the table so that you could look down and say, right, I'm calling off that list only. Refresh yourself with what the list is you're calling off of, and that's all you call. It's always a good idea, especially because there are so many programs.
Right.
I strongly recommend, though, if you're ever in a situation where you're organizing a dance, do not make one hall that has SSD, basic, mainstream, plus an advanced, because you've got a one-day dance convention. Guess what? Everybody gets about maybe an hour and a half of dancing over the entire weekend, except those that dance all levels.
Yeah, I would say I'd see that. And we did actually have, in fact, we ended up having 2 because I brought one, and then somebody else brought one, and he had laminate or in a sleeve that had the basic program. So people, but I mean, really, if you're going to do that, I feel like it's best to practice a little bit before you go to the dance, which I don't think everybody did, but.
That's part of your calling fundamentals. Practice, practice, practice. And once you're finished practicing, you've got it perfected, go back and practice some more. Bob, you had your hand up.
Yes, earlier you were talking about how many times have you heard a caller say, I can break down any floor in that. I taught myself to be successful, and that when I learned, I didn't have the advantage of a caller school. My objective was to be able to call a tip where nobody broke down. And I usually have 2 to 3 of those per night. And then we had a caller seminar back in the 80s with Jack Lazary from Florida. He came out and asked the floor, how many of you can remember the last time you had a perfect tip where nobody broke down? I raised my hand. And he said, when? And I said, last night, 3 times. And he said, you liar. I mean, he really said that in front of the whole Callers Association.
Yeah, Jack was very blunt.
and several callers said, you've never danced to Bob, you don't know. But as it turned out, nobody else could remember the last time they called a perfect tip. And for everybody at all levels, I suggest you make that a goal, is to be able to call a tip that you do it. That dance last night where they couldn't do this and that, the last 2 tips, everybody danced every call I made. They made it through the whole tip without any square ever breaking down. And to me, that's the goal. And that's what callers should be taught to make a goal, is if these people are going to come and dance to me, they deserve perfection. They got to have it a couple times. And what did I hear as some of them were walking out the door? Wow, this was so much fun tonight. You know,
Well,
and
the only perfection that I've achieved is at the end of a dance or something like that. One of my ex-wives would tell me I was a perfect idiot.
there you go. We all have our views of perfection. I worked hard to achieve mine. I'm sure you worked hard to achieve yours.
Absolutely. Jeff, you've got your hand up, and then Gene, I think you had your hand up, or were you just scratching?
Yeah, I can't understand why Corvalab or anyone puts a time frame on teaching. You cannot have one. You'll have people come in 2 weeks after you started and want us to learn. You'll have people that are away on holidays, sick or something else. And you just got to keep revising and going back over it. You cannot stipulate you're going to do 3 of these in 1 year. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Now,
yeah, it's. I'm going to address that first. It is an argument that's come along a long way. One of the reasons for it, when BASIC was BASIC and before the advent of standardization of Color Lab, dancers would go to a dance and the routines were there, and you'd have couple number 1, or you'd have the head couples would be set, and they would do their little routine. The side couples would watch and they would pick it up, very much in the genre of contra dancing. And the routines were fixed and you would learn them quickly, and anybody could start in at any time. You just started in the number 4 or in the side position. As calling advanced and things got standardized, BASIC was a program, and then everything else was an add-on. And all these new movements were developed, and then we ended up with programs such as Mainstream and Plus and so on and so on and so forth. In the mid-70s and the early 80s, BASIC was a program which was, it took you a year to learn BASIC so that you had time to learn the program, dance the program, enjoy the program, and if you wanted to, you could spend another year, still dancing BASIC, but another year and you could learn the Mainstream program. Then you could dance that for a couple of years and you'd go into what was called +1 at the time, and then that was a year, and then another year is +2, and that was advanced, and you were expected to dance all of those kind of programs. In the late 70s, early 80s, Color Lab came up with a standard because now we've suddenly gone from 200-300 dancers and 20,000 dancers at a convention to 6,000 dancers at a convention, thinking successful. And they said, well, we're only bringing new dancers in once a year to start a class, and they're always learning, and now everything's going on. So they had this massive push that said, we're going to standardize this so that the BASIC and the Mainstream program can be taught in 86, I believe my first color teacher, 86 hours of teaching. In other words, 40 weeks of dancing, so that you could do one program a year, BASIC and Mainstream, and at that point you'd be expected to grad. And there was this massive outrage because callers that were very successful calling BASIC said, it takes a year to teach BASIC and a year to dance it comfortably, and my dancers love it. And then so on and so forth. The difference that happened was callers were calling to the dancers. The dancers were having fun. There was no rush. And this thing of a graduation as a certificate really didn't matter because the dancers came in and they enjoyed themselves and they were able to dance, and you were able to bring people in, catch them up, review, and all that. But in the process of standardization, we created lists, we created programs, and somebody decided to say, these aren't programs, these are levels, indicating a capacity or a capability or a class of dancer, meaning I'm better than you are. And it became this rushed push. Paul Adams, before he passed on, always ran a BASIC class. He danced BASIC for a year, and then his dancers would learn Mainstream. And he always had a BASIC club, a Mainstream club, and a Plus club, and they danced all the time, and they fed into each other. And he was very, very successful at it. There was no rush. What Jeff is saying is absolutely true. Unfortunately, the logic behind that is absolute fact. The logic behind, is BASIC a program that is an ideal program for dancers, is an absolute fact. It is. If we had done BASIC properly, we would not even be having this discussion about SSD. However, unfortunately, that ship has sailed. And it's not just, in some places it still works, but that ship has sailed pretty much internationally because we as callers and leaders made that happen. And that's why I'm saying stop trying to go back to the past. Stop trying to do this. Let's make a choice. If you're going to call basic, call basic. If you're going to call SSD, call SSD. But make the choice, stick to your guns, and make the program work, because you're the only people that can do it, whichever way you want to go. Jeff, that is an absolutely valid point about new dancers coming in. We've got to make it fun. SSD is there so that you can recruit and run 3 or 4 classes a year. I would say 2, 3 is a push. I would not do 4 classes a year, because unless you've got a different hall for each class, I wouldn't do 4 classes a year, because you're not giving them time to dance. But 2, great. And it's not a big thing. Give them 12 weeks, time to dance. Start another one in 6 months. 12 weeks, time to dance, and then you've got a club. That would be my opinion, but it's just an opinion, and we all know what they're worth. Excellent comment. Alan.
Yes. Yes.
You're a technical caller, and you've got a mind like a steel trap that is very, very well oiled when it comes to choreography. Have you looked at SSD or anything at all in the Canberra area, or is anybody looking at SSD in the Canberra area? And what were their thoughts?
Yeah, I'll answer that second if you like. I wanted to pick up with Bob's comments earlier. Really, callers should be making a judgment on their first couple of brackets about just where they're going to pitch on the program. If Bob sounded like he was running at the fringes of the program by doing 1.5 and all that, I wonder whether he had actually danced all of the easier stuff first, so that he had the assessment that, well, I might just try moving out to that edge. And that's part of the judgment that you've got to do as a caller. And I'm sure Bob does it, because if he's getting successful brackets,
Okay.
he's making those judgments on the run about where he's going to move in the program. And of course, there's a big difference whether you're teaching newer people or you're running a regular open dance where it's presumed everybody's had sufficient time to learn all the moves that you're at the level you're doing. But you're going to have a variation across your class anyway if you're going to be running multiple classes a year. So you really got to be able to, on your mark, in terms of being able to adjust on the move and keep it interesting, and at the same time keep it within everybody's capability.
Yeah, I know Bob does that. I thought it was interesting because he was doing a plus group that wanted DBD, and his visitors were all SSD classes.
And some of the visitors
that makes
wanted
for an
to learn.
interesting dynamic.
Yeah. But I felt happy as they went home. They were talking about how much fun they had, including the plus dancers.
That's good.
But you're right. I didn't call those things cold. I knew better than to do that, Alan.
Yeah.
I sort of made a workshop earlier before the end of we've got to be able to do reverse wheel around because it's on the SSD program. So I did it. And then the SSD dancer says, we never heard that. They never did a reverse wheel around.
One of the interesting comments, I'll get back to you for your second point there in a second, Alan, but one of the interesting comments that came out in last week's session was reverse wheel around. One of the callers in Sweden, and are you still with us, Helen? I think, yeah, Helen. Yeah. They don't call, or she didn't call reverse wheel around, because what would happen was if you called a wheel around, the dancers would go with the proper body flow that they were going. So they just called wheel around, and if they had to turn right or they had to turn left, the dancers went which way was comfortable because the body flow was there.
Okay.
And it created an interesting discussion about how we actually call and things like that. I thought that was a very interesting comment, because reverse wheel around does tend to confuse people sometimes, mainly because we don't use it. You had your second point, Alan, about SSD in Canberra. Are you guys embracing that, doing that? Or?
We plan, if we can get enough takers to start a class, we plan to do SSD. We dabbled with it last year, but got stopped during the process with COVID, of course. And so we haven't danced almost since July now. And so, but hopefully next year we might be able to do it. But our plan was to try and keep it as a danceable level. But we do have the problem that we have a mixed club, so we have a mainstream plus group, as well that runs on the same night, but we have different halls in the same venue. So we've still got those issues, but yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I would note, Alan's club, when I was down there visiting, they have their new dancer class and they have their mainstream class on the same night, but they're in different halls. And he's got the advantage. He's got some callers that he's mentoring. They flip the callers back. I don't know if you're still doing it that way. Flip the callers back and forth between these halls so that they get, and then the club incorporates and they all dance at the one level. Are you still using that kind of a format?
Yes.
Yeah. And the other thing, I saw a few eyes pop up. Bracket in Australia means tip in the United States. What's a bracket? Just thought I'd throw that. Roz, you had your hand up.
I mean, myself. Yeah, look, the SSD, we've been trying it. We recently had a birthday and we allowed for learner brackets in the birthday. And Scotty had learners. So I contacted Scotty. He was doing SSD. I said, what level are they up to? And he told me, and that made it really easy for what we could call at the birthday. Whereas everyone had different teaching orders with basics. So you couldn't really say, you had to really go into the nitty gritty. So that was a really good plus for it. They're talking about the time. We don't set a time on it. It depends on your dancers. You can have really good dancers that pick it up and fly through, and you can have ones that are really struggling. So it's no good pushing them through if they're not handling it. One of our callers, we do have 4 callers or 5 callers really at our club that share it. One of the callers was trying to push them through, and I actually wrote a list and I said, look, I don't want you to do any new calls this night. I said, here's a list of moves that I think they're having trouble with, which was about 10. And he went, all those? And I went, yes. And afterwards he said, yes, they were having trouble with it. So pushing them through and making it hard for the dancers is not what you want. So I agree with Jeff on that. And the other thing,
Jeff was saying as well.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. Yeah. And the other thing, we have the mainstream dancers there. So I do have a problem. At the moment, it's fine. We do alternate teaching SSD and then doing mainstream. When I bring a new lot of SSD in, I'll have to rethink it because I'll have a learner SSD and mainstream. I'll have 3 levels in the one night. But we did have that.
I personally recommend that you separate SSD from your mainstream group entirely.
Yeah.
And
haven't got an extra.
Do not teach SSD and mainstream in a shared club, unless you've got the advantage like Alan does, where you can keep them separate.
Yeah. Well, we haven't got the whole. We haven't got the extra night, so we've got to go with the flow with what we can do. But when we're a tape group, we actually had 3 levels. We had a learning mainstream and a second group, like they get up to basics, and then I'd get a new learner. So we had a learner of basics, a learner of mainstream, and a mainstream, and we did alternate it, and we managed to work it, but it's a bit tricky. So when this group has finished SSD and we start a new group of SSD, we're going to have to think well in advance on what we're going to do with that to handle it.
Oh, absolutely. I want to share I'm just looking for something right now that I wanted to share with the group, and I thought it was absolutely interesting. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen here for a second. Can you all see that? There's a number of these videos out. Okay. Lost the sound on this. But if you can see what's happening there, this is a big dance. It was a celebration dance, as is this one, But look at the dynamic, look at the age, look at the dress. It's mixed and matched. Some are in square dance clothes, some are not. Some got dressed up. This is an SSD dance. And there's a few dances like that for a couple basic clubs. And you look at the age, you've got a mix of ages going from about 10 years old or 8 years old right up until you've got somebody back here probably well into his 60s or 70s. And they're all having fun, and they're all dancing, and they're all moving around and enjoying themselves. You notice the movements that they were doing, dive-throughs and swings, the timing may not have been that great. The grand square, very, very rushed. The twirls, very rushed with some of the people that were doing it. This young lady was getting up to call, and she's learning to call down there. I don't know if you can hear the sound, but that's actually her calling.
Boys, run to the right. Ferris wheel.
So that was SSD. That dance was actually supported by the clubs. The clubs in that area, there's about 4 or 5 of them. They're all running SSD classes. They got together as a region of callers and said, we're going to do SSD. That's it. We're all going, our new classes are going to be SSD, and then if we're going to do mainstream, we'll have a mainstream group. We can teach, the 3 other basic movements and the mainstream program, but that's going to be a separate club. And they're having a lot of success with it because they're giving their dancers a place to go and dance and enjoy what they've learned. And they've done dances at SSD 5, they've done dances at SSD 7, they've done dances at SSD 9, and they've done SSD. It is one of the things that BASIC used to do. I know in Europe, it used to be very popular. You had the freshman dance, but groups, I know where I was down in the southern part of Germany, the clubs would get together and say, we're going to have a BASIC. Where are your clubs at? Oh, we're at movement 31. Where are you at? Oh, we're at 27. Is anybody lower than 27? Okay, we're going to have a dance in 2 weeks. That's the level, 27. Can everybody get there? Yep. Well, we can't. Okay, we'll set the level at 25. And that's the dance. And they would do that and give that venue for the dancers to go and have fun. I want to say this to address what Jeff was saying and what Roz was saying. Rushing your dancers is never a good idea. SSD is designed for 12 weeks. If you look at the SSD program, you've got fold, cross fold, recycle, scoot back, and walk and dodge. Oh, there's a week's teaching. I'm sorry, that's hard. Dumping all that on your dancers in one night, that's hard. It may not be absolutely correct, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about. If it takes you an additional week to teach one session, or it takes you 3 weeks to teach one session that's in the SSD program, then take it. Take the time for the success of the dancers. And this is why I say SSD is not every 12 weeks bring in, so you're bringing in a new dancer class 4 times a year. Maybe do it once, twice a year if you can do 3 times, but build into your schedule time for them to dance. SSD 5, SSD 8, SSD 12, that they can dance. So build in a couple of extra weeks. It's a 12-week program, but give it 15 weeks and then have your graduation on 16 weeks. That way the dancers have time to dance, learn, look at what they do, and it gives you time to review. That's my opinion. I think the SSD program is not a bad program at all. I think it's too fast. And I think you have to be a real exceptional caller to have success with it. And a lot of callers are having difficulty with it because they don't have the background skills yet building to present it effectively and make it work. Bob's been doing this for many years. I know Jeff and Alan, if you both wanted to do SSD, you would have no problem because your minds are like, mine would be like a peanut in a box car if I compared my choreographic knowledge to both of yours. It's just, I wouldn't be able to compete with you guys on that scale of presentation. So newer callers have the same disadvantage in that they have to learn all those fundamental mechanics of choreography that go to make that work to be successful. That said, newer callers have an advantage in that they don't have to unlearn any of their habits and lists. So it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. But if you're going to do it, make a commitment to it, but don't, as Jeff said, as Roz said, as many others have said, don't rush the dancers. Don't think just because it says 12 weeks that you can take a new input every 12 weeks. Give them time to dance and enjoy. I cannot stress that enough. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, hello. I've made some notes to a couple of points I've heard, and first of all, I'd like to say that every new start, every beginning has its beauty. But what will happen after the honeymoon? And I've heard a lot of arguments for SSD and against BASIC. Are they competitors? To me, more or less it is. And some arguments like fun and sociability, I think they don't count, because
I agree.
that should be in every level. So if we don't have fun and sociability in plus and basic and mainstream, we're doing something wrong. So that should be in every level, suited to the customers, to the dancers, whatever we call to. So let's put those arguments away, okay? Because they need to be in every program. But that's one point.
Before you carry on, Mickey,
Yeah.
I agree 100% with the fun and sociability, and I can't stress, if that's not in your program, whatever you're calling, you're doing it wrong. I agree with that. As far as SSD and BASIC being competitors, objectively and on paper, no, they're not. They're very comparable programs, and the SSD program is written as a standalone that is defined.
I know.
Hang on. Defined as not to compete with the other programs. It's separate. The reality is exactly what you're saying. Yes, the BASIC program, that ship has sailed. They are competitors, and they're going to be competitors, so you have to look at them objectively and make a choice. I just wanted to clarify that because I agree with you.
Right. Oh. And there are some points which I'd like to work out. The one thing is that on the SSD, we have very strict way of teaching. Like we have the session 1, 2, 3, 4, and going up, what is in the program, whatever. We used to have that with BASIC 2 and with the teaching lists. And we had recommendations, how to build it up. And the longer the callers did work with the program, they started to bring in their own ideas and change the lists and modify. Yeah, and then some way on the way, we got lost.
Yep.
Now we have this guideline in the SSD, and I just put one question in the room. How long do you think it will take until we have so many working with the SSD program over, let's say, 5 or maybe 10 years, if it will last that long, until they're going to change and start variations on the program, adding, changing.
This is one of the things that I think Bob has nodded on, and I've noted as well. A lot of callers that are doing the SSD program have already modified or started modifying the teaching order to match their choreography instead of matching their choreography to the teaching order. That's already started.
Right, so it's much faster than I thought, but I wanted to be fair. On the other hand, we have a student party, which is usually takes in January, and we only go up to BASIC 1, which is dive through, right? And this is marked on the flyer, and we have about between 40, depending on the year, 40 to 60 squares. And about 30% only are BASIC students. The rest are mainstream, plus, and even high-level dancers. They come to share and come to dance. Yep. So what I think, if those putting, and there's nothing against it, okay, don't get me wrong, putting the effort into the SSD, if they would put the same effort and enthusiasm into the BASIC and the recruiting the dancers and working that program, I think they would have the same success than they are having now with the SSD. And I wonder what will happen if SSD, let's have it, take a look in the future for 5 years. And your dancers
Absolutely.
can out go into other dances, conventions, whatever, and see the other programs. Do you really believe, yeah, with your hand on the heart, that they will stay in the SSD program, or they're not going to try to find some kind of way of transition to move on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in my club, I call on the basic and mainstream clubs as well, but all my high-level dancers are as well in the basic or mainstream clubs and attend them. Yeah. I think this is the way it should be, but I think Joey Blocker said it. We need to entertain the people. And if we don't entertain them, then they will walk away no matter what level and what program we will run through.
Very valid point,
up here.
Mickey.
I can see the others if they want to comment something or whatever. Or is there a purpose?
I put the list up while you were talking for a reason.
Oh, okay.
And it's a very, very valid point. I agree with you. That was the point I was making with the basic program. Basic and mainstream, basic and SSD, both are very, very excellent, well-designed programs. Both of them could work. Both of them could be very social. Both of them could have, and they're both designed to achieve exactly the same thing: get dancers in, have fun, and entertain. Yep. Can you give me a second? One second. Come on. Come on. There you go.
I mean, no matter what program we work on, you know, the callers need to be disciplined, whether it's basic or SSD. If they don't stick with the program and the philosophy of the program, then
that is correct.
The problems start, right?
Basic will work, SSD will work if the drive is there. The problem is fundamental. For 40 years, basic and mainstream have been a program. For 30 years, basic and mainstream have been a stepping stone in the rush to plus in too many places across the world, that those that do basic successfully are now in the big minority. The reason I put the SSD program up, the comment you said about, for instance, the Freshman's Frolic, I'll use that as an example. I don't know if you still call it that, but the student dance or the halfway dance in some places. The dances that I was talking about with SSD, some of these callers have started modifying the teaching order. They like to do flutter wheel earlier. They like to do it on the same night as right and left through. I don't know why, but they just like doing it. And what they do is when they have a dance, they'll say, right, the dance is SSD 5, that's it. So they know that they cannot do a flutter wheel at that level. And that's the same as the Freshman's Frolic. You say, right, movement 29 on the list, even though you may have got to a higher level or a lower level. If that's the expectation, that's where you get to. So those things are very, very comparable between the two. I have no problem with basic. I love basic. I love calling basic. I don't have a problem with SSD, but I will honestly tell you, I've only looked at it objectively. I have not had the opportunity to call SSD. But if we stick to the principles, like you said, and the fundamentals of what it's supposed to be, it will work. I personally believe basic as a program is a good program, probably the best program ever. It's an absolute dream to call. It's a dream to dance. But I also firmly believe that if we want to make square dancing survive today, that ship has sailed, because we've got to take everybody that is currently dancing out of the picture and get rid of all their preconceived biases about what it is and what the program is. It's no longer what it was designed to be. It's turned into something else in most places in the world.
Yeah,
Mickey, the last word, and then we'll go to you, Bob.
Yeah. And yeah, I think basic is not dead, because it's the foundation of the SSD, with adding some of the mainstream calls. Otherwise, they would have created a total different program or created own calls or whatever. And the only sad thing I think is, you know, and I think we should have one entry level all over the world. So we truly learn somewhere and we can dance everywhere. And I think we are ruining one of our biggest selling points, now with COVID, we can't travel that much, but if that gets back to normal, when we're so much on duty travel, on holiday travel, and to meet friends all over the world, I think this is one of the big selling points we're missing. And I think if there's a problem with the entry level about naming or rearranging the number of calls or a setting, then we should go down and sit down and do that. But we should not start another level. The next one will start a level maybe called Fun Square. And he have some calls from basic and mainstream, and maybe 2 calls from plus, and let's pick one from A and have a nice one from C.
I can tell you right now, Mickey, that has already happened about half a dozen times. We've had Club 50, we've had Social 50, we've had Social 25. Yeah. But what I will like to say is the thing that you hit the head on is I do agree with. SSD and BASIC are not designed to be competitors, but they will be because of the mentality of square dancing today. And if I have a feeling, this is just my own personal interpretation looking at this objectively, BASIC as a level, BASIC as a program is fantastic, but it will fail as a collective body. I have a feeling that in about 5 years we're going to see a polymorph, which is going to be SSD in its existing structure or slightly modified, mainstream, which will be the 3 basic movements, the rest of the mainstream program, and a few modifications to put the extended applications. That'll be the mainstream program, probably with a couple of simple movements from the plus program pulled down into it, and then a modified plus program. I have a feeling that in 10 years, 5-10 years, if I'm still around long enough to watch that, that's what we're going to see. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as we all collectively work together and support it as a program. But until
then we will have the same problems like we have now. The other way, what I would think is maybe then we will have an entry program called 50, whatever is in there, and then get rid of the name mainstream maybe and have a plus program or an edit program, stepping program. And there were plans out already to do things like that. Right?
Yeah, I know. And like I said, I have no idea what it's going to morph into, but it's going to be an interesting time. But the only thing that's going to happen is we're going to create further divisions until people collectively pull their heads out of their respective backsides and realize that we can sit and argue about it. We can't fix it, but we can do something that will make it work and survive for the future without totally destroying what it's supposed to be. And I think this is actually the kind of discussion that should have been had before SSD was developed as a program. It's one of the discussions I did have with Jerry when we started talking about SSD as a program prior to his presentation here and looking at different things about what it is. And you're right about lists. What's on the list is an arbitrary thing. The list was designed and put in people. I asked Jerry why Spin the Top, which is such a popular call everywhere in the world, is not on the SSD program, and his response was, I was asked to create a list. We don't use it that much where I am, so we didn't put it on the list. A lot of this is an arbitrary decision. He took what was there as a starting point, and that's fine, because somebody did something. It's now being supported. It's going somewhere. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Whether how I feel about Spin the Top,
it's not so much the problem. It's not so much a problem what is within the lists. It's that the callers would have to stick to it and work them.
That's correct.
And it's the same problem. Who did not work the basic or mainstream list? Why is he gonna work the SSD list?
That was the last slide that I had. Why would we expect anything different to happen if we adopt SSD? Because we as callers and leaders ruined BASIC for what it was. Why do we expect anything to change with SSD? Well, we don't expect it, but we can always hope. Bob, you had your hand up.
How many weeks is it recommended for? I got 2 things I want to talk about. How many weeks are you expected to teach the BASIC program?
BASIC, the Color Lab recommendation is 20 weeks.
Okay, so we have.
That's an average. That's 2 hours. That's a 2-hour program. So
yes,
40 hours.
So we had this program that took 20 weeks to teach. And in Jerry's infinite wisdom, we added additional calls and told everybody, now you can do it in 12.
No, not quite.
Exactly. There's how many basic calls are not on the SSD list? Three. How many additional mainstream calls are on the list?
15 or 6 on the list.
6. So
7,
that's a total of 7. So that's a total of 4 more calls than's on the basic list. And so we've added 4 calls to our teaching requirements, and we can do that in half the time.
Yeah, the difference, Bob. No, the difference is not you're not giving it a fair comparison. What you're comparing is navel oranges to Christmas mandarins. Okay, they're both oranges, and saying that they're 2 completely different entities, because the basic program was designed as a slower moving program to learn the fundamentals of the basic program, to learn the standard application variations, and to learn the extended applications of the basic program as they apply to the movement, and then enjoy dancing it, to learn it in 20 weeks and then dance it for a year to be comfortable with it, and that would be an acceptable program. That's what the way the basic program was designed. The SSD program is designed to have, here's these movements, but standard application and standard application variation, such as square through is a standard application, left square through is a standard application, boys square through is a standard application, but your variations where you got 2 boys and 1 girl, or 2 boys and 3 boys and 1 girl doing a left square through, that would be an application variation, depending on how you set this up. Those are
and they did that in mainstream. I mean,
yeah,
in the basic program.
Those were designed to be incorporated into SSD. If there's an extended application, those are not designed to be incorporated into SSD. They are designed to be incorporated into BASIC, but at SSD, after you finish the entire SSD program from the standard applications with limited variations, extended applications are 1-night workshop material, and if ever you present that material again, you're required to prompt it or workshop it. And you can do that. There's nothing that says in the SSD program you can't teach or you can't dance, load the boat. If you want to do that at an SSD dance, you can. It's a one-time workshop. If you want to teach Red Hot, it's a one-time workshop, and then it's forgotten. It does not become part of the program. That's where the 2 programs divide. SSD is divided to be a more simplistic approach, standard application variations. But I'm just out of curiosity, how many people have actually read the documents, the standard application documents for each of the programs that they call for? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 21 people, so we've got less than 1/4. Well, we've got 1/4 of the audience just here of callers that have read these standard application documents. Now think about that globally around the world, and Bob, going into what you teach, how many classes of basic and mainstream have you seen where they graduate the mainstream dancers and all they've learned is a simple version of standard application before they get pulled into the plus program? That's not a problem with the program, that's not a problem with the time of the program, that's a problem with callers applying it properly and doing it properly, which is what Mickey was saying. If we do it right, it works.
All of a sudden, with the SSD, they're going to do it properly.
No. Again,
want to buy a bridge?
That's exactly what we're saying is the issue. The SSD is not going to work unless callers do what it's supposed to do. That's the reason BASIC did not work, is because callers did not follow the intent of what it was. And it's only time will tell if SSD is going to be what many callers are doing. I've got my mainstream and plus group and I'm doing an SSD class and we're all on one night. Well, 12 weeks I've got them dancing. Where are they going to go after that 12 weeks? Because I got another class coming in.
And I think one mistake in the BASIC was made as well, that it is there should have been a distinction between those dancers starting and entering the activity, and just have them fed with standard application and fun and entertaining. And then afterwards, when they continue on or even go move into the mainstream, then maybe within the mainstream learning, the additional extended applications or variations should have been learned. Yeah. But sometimes I've seen callers doing student dancers, and they come and what I would call basic DVD, which is nice to call for high-level dancers, but I think it has nothing to do or should not be on the presented to those just been in the activity for 10 or 15 weeks and just starting to learn and just starting to walk, and now we expect them to jump over whatever. Yeah.
Yep.
They're just learning to walk, and we should first let them walk and enjoy the walk until we start to run and jump and whatever.
I put this screen up, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I've just put some of the choreo. All of this stuff is in the documents, which can be downloaded off the site, or I put it into the chat as well. But this is an example of at the SSD 1. All right, let's just square them up. So this is your first night dancing. Yeah, 4 ladies chain 3/4, heads promenade halfway, sides pass through, wheel around and back away, Alaman left, right and left grand, swing your corner, and promenade home. Are you guys okay if I put this on fast?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is night 1 of the SSD program. This is night 1 of most basic programs. This is night 1 of probably a lot of your introduction to square dancing. The only thing that really varies in that is some callers say, I don't do corner progression until week 3. If you don't do that, you can just, instead of doing that, walk by one and take your partner a promenade or whatever. That's just an example of SSD1. This is choreography that's been sent in that callers are using successfully at the SSD program. All of this material, with the exception of the movement slide through, is basic material. So if we go into SSD week 2, this is our second week. So we square the set. Head ladies chain, sides promenade 3/4, centers pass through, do side do, star through, pass through, wheel around, slide through, swing your corner, and promenade home. Square the set. That's the second night. Still pretty straightforward, except we've introduced the movement slide through. Why did we introduce slide through? Because it's on the program. We've got star through and slide through, and we want to use them pretty much together. If we carry on, this is also week 2. Wheel around and a half sachet. Wheel around is week 1, half sachet week 2. Star through, do side do, slide through. Great. Pass through week 1, reverse wheel around week 1, week 1, week 2, week 1, week 1. So we've introduced the 2 movements, the slide through and the half sachet. Everything else is review. And this is the choreography. Pass through, wheel around, half sachet. Reverse half sachet. Alaman left, swing your corner and promenade. Okay, that's SSD standard application, a standard application variation, which is the reverse half sachet. Second week of SSD program. When was the last time any of you have called a reverse half sachet in your dance, other than Jeff and Alan, because I know you guys use it. I know Bob, you use it. Joe, I know you use it. Okay, so, but it's not a common movement that's called. And yet that's part of the basic program. Why? Because
Jerry liked it.
Yeah. Sorry?
Jerry liked it.
No, I used to call it all the time, half sachet, reverse half sachet, because it was part of the program.
I even call sachet.
Yeah.
How many of you actually sachet the partner?
My first list and my definitions were actually translated from English to German. I had a German caller teaching me, translated from German to English, so it was very formal. This is what you did. This is part of the program. You got to use this material. That's the way I was taught. That's not taught everywhere. We get into the third night and we're looking at pass through. Do we U-turn back? There's a new movement. Circle 4 left halfway. Ooh. Slide through, star through, reverse, star through, slide through. We're putting combinations together, and the reason those are like that is because one's hands, the other one's hands free. Most callers teaching basic do the same thing with slide through. They introduce it early so they can get the hands free. So let's just put that right back at the start. Square the set, and we've got pass through, U-turn back, star through. Circle 4 left halfway, star through, dive through, new movement. Everything else is review, building on what we know, and promenade home. That's week 3. And the only movement we've introduced there is the circle 4 halfway, or sorry, is the dive through. Circle 4 halfway is already on your first night. We're just bringing stuff back and review it. But how many of us call circle 4 halfway or circle 4 3/4 rather than circle to a line? A lot of people do now, but not a lot of callers do it. They'll call circle to a line. Also in SSD 3, star through, centers, pass through, circle 4 halfway, dive through, centers, star through and back away, roll away again. That's a roll away from a squared set, back to the same squared set, and a roll away from a squared set. No circle left in there. That figure came in from a caller that says, I called that and I couldn't get my dancers to do it because as soon as I did a roll away, all of the dancers that were dancing mainstream and plus started circling left. And said, well, how do I fix that? You say, roll away, don't circle. Or just change it to a half sachet, don't circle. Give them the prompt for success. But this is a girls roll away and a boys roll away done at the SSD program. Week 3, nothing new here. Stuff you already know. And all standard application. We get into the 4th week. The 4th week is where we learn. What do we learn? Dive through? No. Square through. Yeah. Square through and grand square. That's the entire 4th week. So 4 ladies chain, sides promenade, heads square through. New movement. Standard application. Do, side, do, insides arch, dive through, star through, and promenade home. Now, this is, left square through is what's called a standard application variation. It is a standard application doing left square through. It's not common, but it is part of the SSD program to be taught, left square through. And you can do exactly the same thing. And you notice on this one, you've got left square through, left do, side do. That's your standard application variation. Another left square through, because we're looking at square through, and a reverse wheel around. But everything else they've done, and we introducing, this is your question, Bob, do, side do, 1.5. This is where it got introduced, not because it's difficult, but because if I call pass through, I've now added so many extra beats. I could say pass through instead of do, side do, 1.5 if they're falling behind. But this fills in the timing for the dance.
I got a story about that was really fun. I was teaching 3rd graders and 4th graders square dancing, and I did a do, side do halfway, and a 3rd grader walked up to me, raised his hand, and says, Mr. Elling, is do, side do halfway a pass through? And I just thought that was so cool coming from a 3rd grader.
You've got that. And now you're introducing fractions. And from here, because I've done do, side do 1.5, as I go forward, I can carry on with the introduction of those simple fractions. So when we get to the circulate once and a half, everybody bend your line, you're in a square, or however you want to end that. All of that goes into. That's a standard application variation. And that is what you want at the SSD program. All of this is material that is called at the SSD program. Week 5, I'm not going to go through all of it. There's about 30 pages of it, okay? But here we're getting into the couple, circulate, and chain down the line. And I wanted to show this because this is going into what Joe Ubelacker was saying. So we've got the chain down the line, forward and back, star through, dive through, centers pass through, do, side, do, 1.5, swing your corner. Instead of 1.5 to an Alaman left, we're going now 1.5 to swing the corner. We're keeping that fraction, but it's ending in a place which is known to the dancers now. There's a corner that I'm familiar with. I understand corner progression. And as we're going, this is also week 5. I'm just going to slow this one down a bit. So, pass through, wheel around, and lead to the left. Veer to the right. Okay. Notice the direction of the circulate. This is what Joe was saying. This is, if you want this is not hard. Veer left and veer right is part of your SSD program. Circulate, Ferris wheel, is part of your SSD program. But why do we always do our Ferris wheel the same way? Why do we always do our circulates the same way? You know, here all I've done is change the direction, bend the line, and back to our review. Pass through, California twirl, star through, slide through, square through, 4. Oh my God, would I call that? Well, of course I would call that, but this goes into where Bob was talking earlier. This is one of those pieces of choreography that came in. Let's go to here. Okay, just watch number 1 man, I guess. Okay, California twirl, star through, right turn, another right turn, square through 4, right turn, right turn, right turn, right turn, and then a swing. Okay, that was sent in.
Which is another right turn.
which is another right turn. Okay, this is what's called the Ice Princess, but believe it or not, you can actually get away with that. It's not something I would call regularly. But that's more the gimmick where you have slide through, star through, square through, slide through, star through, pass through, slide through, star through, square through. You know, those kinds of things. It's a fast uptake. It's not something you want to do a lot. It's something that I would not personally recommend you doing unless you've got real comfortable dancers and you say, okay, guys, we're going to learn ice skating tonight. Let them know what you're doing. Don't call out. If you're aware and you're using it as a gimmick, fine. Otherwise, that kind of flow is just bad choreography. But it's incorporated because it was sent in.
But just a comment to the nice things we've saw now and the overflow on this one, that really has nothing to do with SSD. I mean, those are things which are called or
Thank
can
you.
be
I've been
called,
waiting for that.
on basic or mainstream programs as well. I mean, that's not just owned by SSD, the choreo. It is Square Dance moves combined and whatever program it's used in. So
I have been waiting for somebody to say that. I said, well, that's got nothing to do with the programs. That has to do with the fundamentals and the basic structure of calling
and
movement mechanics,
creativity and whoever puts the choreo together. And if it's good choreo, then and invented by SSD callers, then the basic callers should get their whatever up and work. Yeah, but the choreo is there.
Okay. Now, there's one thing in this one that I wanted to note. This came in, and I kept it as it was. Okay, look at this combination here. Okay. Right and left through followed by a star through. Right, hand behind the back, courtesy turn, star through, hand's got to come out from underneath and then up to do the star through. Okay. On that, I would have changed, that's the only thing I really would have changed that to, was a slide through. Because it's already in your repertoire, why not change it?
Or turn it around.
Yeah, or star through, right and left through. But I don't even like star through, right and left through. I would still do slide through, right and left through. But it's there, and like I said, look at these things. You'll as you go through that 20 some odd pages of choreography that's written, you'll see little things like that. But veer to the left, chain down the line, slide through, left square through 3. And then swing your corner. 1, 2, 3, right hand swing.
Yeah.
Okay, these are things that you have to be aware of. That should have been just a square through 3, but you're doing it with the innovation. You can do all that. You can do a left square through 3. I think what happened on here is they did left 1, 2, 3, and they were going to go into a setup for a right and left wrong way grand with the corner or something like that in their batter, but they just left the choreography. But it's not bad choreography, really. Calling a swing there would have been, but okay. And then we get into week 6, which is as far as I went with this, but there's examples to the whole sequence. Okay, so half sachet and slide through, right and left through, dive through, centers pass through, slide through, do the right and left through, flutter wheel, pick up the boy, reverse flutter wheel, keep her, and promenade.
I'm sure a lot of callers called that before the SSD ever was invented. Nice choreo.
Oh yeah. And if Joni was still here, Joni said she's got something like 2,000 singing calls that she's gone through and she's categorized into the SSD program off of all the record labels. What there are, almost 70% of all of the singing call labels that are out there fit into the SSD program.
Right, of course.
In standard application. All of these, if you look at these, I'm just going to put this up here. Can you see the text document on your screen?
No, we see termination.
Should be there.
Yeah.
That's the sequence. Okay, so these are standard openers. This is SSD 1. And what I've done is I've just gone through everything that people have sent me and I've categorized them. Ones that came in, and there was a lot of material that came in, and I should have actually kept it, but I was just deleting it as I went for expedience. There was a lot of material that came in on the SSD program that was using mainstream movements. I should have kept them. I'm an idiot. But I just deleted them because I wanted to use just the basic program movements in this presentation. So hopefully I can refine all those. And then we got SSD. These are just openers. SSD 8. This is an opener. 4 ladies chain, girls, run to the left to an Alamo ring, balance. Left swing through twice. Do the right and left grand. Swing your partner promenade. Wow, that's a pretty fancy opening. Be happy to do that in mainstream. I'd be happy to do that at a plus dance. Alaman left in the Alamo style, balance, swing through. Balance again, swing through, turn partner right, Alaman left. Weave the ring.
Call from unavailable.
Oh, that's yours. I thought it was mine. Okay, and then it goes up to SSD 11, box the gnat. There's a mainstream one. Why is that mainstream?
At the do paso.
No,
Yeah.
do paso is basic. Alaman Dar. The Dar family is mainstream. Okay, but you cannot call that at SSD because it's got a do paso in it and it's got an Alaman Dar in it. So I've just noted those for comparison. And as you go through, this is a standard opening. Bob, I apologize. I don't know if you've released this record now, but that's from one of these SSD singing calls in night 1 on your records. I will have a jubilee way down. We learned an SSD, and we'll shout out hallelujah all the way. Anyway, I don't know if you've released that record yet, but I stole the choreography of it. But it just shows you, you can do that. And as Mickey was saying, at any program, heads go up the middle and come up, if your dancers can have fun, join in and sing that and dance that, they're going to have fun, they're going to come back. Little product plug, so Bob, you can put that record out and say,
I believe it is out.
Yeah, and then there's all these are just, they're incorporated, these are the movements from week 1. These are the figures from week 1 that have come in. Week 2, slide through is highlighted in blue. It's a mainstream movement, but I've incorporated it here because it is week 2, and that's the only mainstream movement. all of these are SSD or SSD standard application variations that you could expect to dance at an SSD club if that was the night. If it says SSD 3, you could expect to dance any of this choreography without a problem. You could expect to call SSD 5 without a problem. Until you get into, I noted that.
I wouldn't say without a problem, Mel.
Well, sorry.
Yeah, with
dancer,
the hesitancy from the new dancers, maybe, yes.
Your dancer expectation and your caller expectation is if I've advertised SSD 7, they should be able to dance all these movements from a standard application with limited standard application variations, which is all I have here. After 7 weeks of dancing, they should be able to dance this type of material.
Actually,
don't take this as a criticism, Mel, but I thought it would have been nice to have paralleled this presentation with the dancer psychology and the dancer aspiration.
I started doing that, but I got it.
It's part of this success story, how it's going to work, yes.
I started doing this because what I wanted to do was say basic and put basic SSD and then put the choreography up and show what the difference was with an extended. I didn't go into that because the presentation itself is an hour long.
Yes.
And to get into that would have been, that's almost 3 sessions by themselves. But I did note a couple of places here. Hang on, Bob, I'll show you. This has a right-hand lady progression. Don't be afraid of right-hand lady progressions. Use them. I've marked this as SAV, which is a standard application variation. And that variation is flutter wheel. I've got the boys going in doing the flutter wheel, or the right-hand dancer, which is how it's taught, and the girls. But that's your application variation, followed by a boys roll away, smile at her, and promenader. And then later on, you notice there's a couple of these marked SAV. This is a circle to a line that has the inside couple half sashayed. Or sorry, the outside couple, the inside couple half sashayed. That's a standard application variation. I would, according to the book, I would call that an extended application personally. And then there is one in here which I've got later on.
I do 4 boys in the center, circle to a line with the girls.
Now, this here is an extended application. Even though this is pretty straightforward, heads half sachet, heads pass through, separate around 1. Actually, I wonder if I could do that. I'm going to put terminations up on the screen and see if this will actually go into terminations. So, stop share, share, terminations, reset, paste. Okay. So this is an extended application. This is not part of the SSD program. This is something, if you were going to do this at SSD, it's in the SSD level, but this is something that you would do as an evening workshop. And this is what I was saying, Alan, why I couldn't really compare the two, because there are so many examples of this in every level. But if we do heads, do a half sachet, pass through, and separate, this is all SSD standard application at this point. Left touch a quarter, circulate, zoom. Let's go back. Okay. So we've done left touch a quarter, circulate. Zoom from a column is not a standard application. It's not a standard application variation. It's an application variation. Even though it's very simple to do once you've got the idea, this is something, if you were going to call this at an SSD level, it would be a one-night workshop. Never call it again unless you're going to prompt it again. Girls of the leader, you go back. So we've got a zoom. After that, we're right back into it. Boys run, pass through, trade by, swing through, twice, turn through, swing your corner, and promenade. And you notice, even though to here, takes 48 beats of music to get to the normal swing point, which should be here. It's set up to swing at halfway, and that's to allow time for the extended application. And the caller that sent that in to me, I said, well, you're starting halfway around. He says, yeah, this is why. It's an extended application. It's not part of the program. We're doing this. We want to give the dancers the ability to success. So we're calling swing and promenade from the halfway point. So I've got an 8-beat promenade with a 4-beat swing instead of 16 beats with a 4-beat swing.
See, that's
that made sense to me.
That's one thing I would never do. Is I would teach it in the choreography so that they wouldn't need extra beats. Extra beats mean stop dancing and do puzzles. You know, yeah. I want people to flow to the music. So I would not give them extra beats.
If I were to call this, and I'm in complete agreement with you, and you saw in my presentation, if you've got 64 beats of music, give them 64 beats of choreography. And that's easy enough to do by saying swinger twice and promenade, or swing at home. But the actual flow of this is pretty good. And, you know, that choreography, I noticed you got the circulate in front of the zoom. You don't have a left touch a quarter in zoom. It meets all the parameters for body flow. It meets all the parameters for everything else. You've got the direction changes. You've got the big looping. You've got the turn through to the corner. You've got a swing, you know, swing corner and promenade home. The fact that they back up the swing, that's a computer glitch. That the flow is not actually like that. They don't stop and back up into the swing. But the thing with this is it calculates the timing based on a 4-beat swing and a 12-beat promenade. But it's not. We all know that. So you can swing her twice, or you can swing at home, or you can do that. Or, as Bob said, eventually once they've got the idea and you're workshopping zoom from a column, set your choreography so that your swing is done from here at the 44 beat mark, or sorry, here at the 44 beat mark, so they do 48 swing, or at the 48 beat mark, they do their swing here and they've got a 12 beat promenade to get home. So everything times out. And Bob is very, very good at doing that in his choreography. It's timed. You got 64 beats of dancing to 64 beats of music. But
and when you have a class and you teach them to dance to the beat of the music, and you give them the 64 beats, when you start giving them unusual choreography, they will perform it in a better time. I find it harder to teach today than I ever have before, because I swear people uproot trees and bring them to the class and plant them in their square. You know, that's about how fast some people move. I see a guy do a grand square in 4 steps, you know.
Man, one of the big compliments that I heard was actually about your calling, Mickey. It was another caller in Europe that said, one of the nice things about Mickey, he calls some weird stuff, but you have to move to the music and you feel like you can't do anything else.
There you go.
And that's a perfect dance in my opinion. Even if the square breaks down, if Mickey is calling and he says, head square through 4, stick out your left hand, do a left touch a quarter, scoot back, and whoppity ding dong, the dancers are going to automatically start doing what he wants to do, because there's really no other alternative. It feels right, it flows right. Now that
I would do a left square through and then a left touch a quarter.
Yeah. So when you do something like that, if you've got a caller that is able to call, and even if you've never heard that call before, and I heard this with Al Stevens, and I heard this with Dave Prescott when I was calling in Germany, and also with Randy Page in Massachusetts. They had called a couple of setups that I had never danced before, but I had no alternative but to succeed, because doing anything else would have felt wrong. And I heard that said about your calling, Mickey, a while ago. I was going to pass on. I just remembered that it's even if he calls something you don't know, you feel like you don't have any choice but to do it properly. And that is such a wonderful compliment that any caller, when somebody says, I hope somebody says it about me sometime, but when you hear something like that, you know you're doing it right.
Mm-hmm. But I have to add something to it.
Yeah, I know it's left square through and then left walk.
No, not about that. It's something that is sometimes really is a matter of programming, build up slowly. And sometimes callers, I see them taking the notes, and then I tell others around and said, he's gonna call me next week, because he took notes of what happened and what was the nice part and the gimmick or whatever the tricky part, but he did not understand that 2 or 3 tips before I already laid the path to success.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
It doesn't make sense to take the notes, because then when he called me, I told him, you have to do that before, because the dancers need to trust in you. Mm-hmm. They're not supposed on this thing to start thinking, is he right? He's guiding us through the mountain. Shall we trust him? They have to do it. And that you have to build up and earn. And that's the success part.
The last caller that I actually have seen that happen to, and I haven't danced in a while now, was actually Howard Coburn at the halfway dance in Lockhart. And I wasn't dancing at the time. I was standing next to another young lady who was learning to call. And she didn't want to get up and do a tip because she can't do a singing call. Her patter calling is, God, I wish I could call patter the way she did when I had that limited experience. She's an excellent patter caller, but she has her own hesitation about her singing quality, which is not that bad really. And we were just standing there, and Howard was calling, and he did a couple of sequences prompting the dancers through, and then he started calling his dance. And I wasn't even aware I was doing that. He'd call head square through forward, and he'd call something and set it up. And I started saying what he was going to call next before he called it. And she looked at me and said, how do you know that? And I just said, there's really nothing else he could call that would be comfortable. And it was just one of those, it's just one of those rares. And God, I wish I'd written it down, but it was one of those rare things that you see. There's really nothing else you can do that is going to be so smooth and so comfortable that he did at that dance. And it was just amazing because there is no alternative. And none of the dancers had any problem because there was nothing else they could have done without doing it wrong. And it goes back to what Helen was saying about reverse wheel around, Helen Tronstedt from Sweden. She calls it wheel around because the dancers will go which way. If she calls wheel around, they tend to fight against it. But if she calls wheel around, they'll do a reverse wheel around because that's the way their body flow is going. It's just those kinds of things that happen periodically. Yes, Bob.
There was another topic that we were on way earlier, and when Mickey was talking, and it was about having a simple, universal, easy level that you could do it all over the world or something along those terms. And we dealt quite a bit into that issue here in the Bay Area with a caller, Nate Bliss, who used to record for me. And of course, he was a recording star on many labels, had one of the most beautiful voices to grace the square dance world ever. And we finally came with what I still today would be the greatest thing. Who would come to an SSD? That sounds so exciting or whatever. So he said we needed a name for the program that would draw people to it with the name itself. And we tried it in the Bay Area here. It went well here, but it went nowhere else. He just said, we're going to have a classic square dance. And that was it. We call it a classic square dance, and it was a basic 50. We didn't call it a basic 50, we called it a classic, and that attracted people to want to come to the dance.
You're reading my book.
We're in agreement, Michael.
Absolutely.
I want to offer you a name that's already there, and it's a fantastic name.
I like
for
it.
a program.
I like it.
One of the things that was an argument is the change from sustainable square dancing, because that was, we have a problem, we're not sustainable, here's a fix, and it was being pushed down to people's throat, and people balk against being told that something that they're doing and that they love is broken. They hate it. You're doing it wrong. And that's what sustainable square dance basically said. You're doing it wrong, do this. And that's why the name, they changed to social square dancing. The stigma that applies to that is, we want to have fun, we want to make it so everybody can dance, it's fun, it's entertaining, and there's no stigma attached to it. Well, that basically says that, well, basic, mainstream, plus, advanced all have a stigma attached to it. They're not social anymore. They're not about square dancing and community. And then that argument started. Mickey, I'm with you. This is personal opinion, this is against. What I presented was an objective look. This is personal opinion. I think, personally, social square dancing and basic cannot coexist in our current structure. I don't think social square dancing, basic, mainstream can coexist in our current structure. Mainly because we're too old, we're too set in our ways to change. And now I'm not talking about now, this is just a personal opinion. If square dancing is to survive 10 years into the future, we need to stop having these arguments that are stupid. We need to say, right, we need to choose what we're going to do and develop and create something that is logical, something that is progressive, that is standalone, and if hypothetically, I don't know what it's going to be in the future, but if SSD is what SSD is going to be, then that's your entry program. And that's, as Bob might say, that's your classic square dance. If the next level is mainstream or the next level is goop-de-goop, whatever we want to call it, that will have specific terms and definitions, and then the next level could be whatever. That's the only way if we change our mindset. If we don't,
we had an interesting discussion on the mainstream committee in the Zoom meeting, and one brought up a point that one mistake was to take the name mainstream, because that was what everybody would dance, and this is mainstream, and therefore it was a bad stepping stone for basic, because nobody wanted to be basic. So if we could probably go ahead with 3 steps, I think we would. What I would like to have an entry level, which works worldwide and which is accepted, and maybe even be a destiny level, and as well a chance of moving on to the other programs. Point 1. Second point, to be disciplined and work the program and stay within the listing and the teaching and the application forms, and then get an attractive name. I like the classic square dance, I like that. And then kind of build it up and then work it. I think this could be a success, because we need to attract more newer dancers and get them in the activity, maybe by even shortening the class, okay? Or, by using only standard applications. And we have to find a way to keep existing dancers. And we have to be disciplined in working the programs. If we can get that all under one hat, I think that would be a road to success.
One of the things that is in that line, and I did put out what I said objectively, and I stand by that. I don't think SSD and our current basic mainstream stream, if you will, of dancing can coexist with longevity. Yeah. I will also put out that I am more pro basic, mainstream, plus as 3 separate programs than I am SSD, mainstream, plus.
So am I.
But that's my opinion. But I have to be fair, it is here. Mickey, I agree with you wholeheartedly, but it all boils down to the same problem that we have. If we couldn't get callers to support basic and do what it was, how are we going to get them to support mainstream? The only way it's going to change is if we change it. One of the best examples of that was a caller who was saying, right, I'm going to call a mainstream dance, this is mainstream, and what he called was SSD. He only used the mainstream movements off the SSD program, called an exceptional dance, and that was it. But that was the mainstream haul. Basics couldn't come into it because it was mainstream. SSD couldn't come into it because it was, SSD could go into it because it was SSD. But if they had only danced basic, they could go into it too, because he didn't use walk around your corner, do paso, or seesaw. He called an SSD dance. It was called a mainstream dance. All his SSD dancers showed up, danced effectively. All the mainstream, and nobody knew the difference.
And I don't know how many would have been there just SSD and basic dances, because if he'd called a do paso using one hand to the other, going from one person to the other, they probably would have made it anyway.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying, he didn't use that movement.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
You're absolutely correct. And you know, callers today have been doing this a lot. This, you know, we used to do it all the time. We're going to do a mainstream dance. Oh, it's mainstream. Oh, yeah. Oh, but I haven't quite finished. I haven't done recycle. Okay, that's no problem. We'll just do the whole dance, but nobody use recycle. Not a problem. And we would call an entire dance without using recycle, and nobody noticed.
No.
Because they were having fun. Well,
We had a
can
student.
do it. We can do it. We just have to be dedicated and committing to do it. But it's not individual. Individuals are not the problem. Every individual is capable of doing this successfully for themselves and for their clubs. Collectively changing the mindset of callers, and more importantly, changing the mindset of existing dancers. They can have fun dancing. This may be sneaky, it's underhanded, it's manipulative, and it's advertising, but if you don't tell the dancers, and you're calling a plus dance and you don't do any of that, or if you're calling a mainstream dance and you don't use certain movements, if you don't call a spin the top, chances are, if you call a good dance, they're not going to notice. And we can do this collectively if that's the way we want to go. I honestly don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years. I don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years. I do know that in its current existing state, it's a thought process that looks good on paper, but it will not work objectively until we all collectively change our mindsets.
Why is the basic program not working now? Because the newer callers want to call the other calls. They want to call the plus calls. That's why we have that push. And do you think we're not going to have that push because we created SSD? No. You'll have a few responsible callers who will do it right and can make it work.
Yep.
But the other callers are going to want more.
That's exactly what I said. It is not the problem. The problem is not new dancers. The problem is existing dancers that want what they know and are comfortable, and callers that are, in my opinion, too lazy to do the work. And we see it at caller school all the time. When you say, right, no more plus being called at this caller school, a lot of these callers that got up there, and when I went to my first caller school, they got up, everybody did their display tip to show where they were at. And I thought, oh my God, these guys are fantastic callers. I am way over my head with this group. And then Tony Oxendine and Ken Ritucci said, right now, for the rest of the school, we're taking away all of the plus. Nobody's allowed to plus. There's nothing above mainstream, and that's it. And got everybody up to do another tip that they hadn't prepared and practiced, just to get up and do a mainstream. Very few of these callers could call a simple mainstream pattern without switching to the plus, because that's where their comfort zone was. It was hard for them to do that. And it really showed me that I took to heart. That's where the change has to happen with us. If we want to make it work, we've got to all make it work. And remember that the only people that are getting bored are the callers. The dancers, if you do your work, you're going to find that different but not difficult can be fascinating and very entertaining. And I hope I provided some of that with some of that choreography today.
It's got to be an attitude adjustment. If it's not, then SSD will face the same problems we're facing with basic and mainstream and all the other problems. I was calling a basic dance, a big one, down in the Munich area, and with some other callers. They had callers walking up.
Keep going. I'll be right back. Keep going.
And one caller, he was really showing off, and his watching square was doing everything he did, but that was DVD and was way above the head. The whole floor was standing. And when he came down from the stage, he asked, how was it? And I said, well, you had a nice square walking, but the rest was standing. I didn't like it. It was not for the students. And other callers telling him the same thing. And then I walked up on the stage and they told him, which they told me afterwards, he's going to show you what to do now. And I just had everybody moving, and I just did plain vanilla. They enjoyed, and even had a handout for that round. And when I came down and he said, well, that was nothing special. And I said, what do you mean? And the other said, well, you know, he didn't have one square breakdown. And I like what Bob said. Just a couple of minutes ago with your success of Colin. And when I went to college school with Al Stevens, he said, any idiot can break a square down. It takes a good caller to keep everybody moving. And I kept that in mind in another caller school I was with, Jim Mayo, when he said his task is to not have one square breakdown. Now that's tough to achieve with a lot of Colin, but I'm trying to follow that footsteps, right? But I think this is the name of the game. We're there for the dancers, and not the dancers are there for us.
Sure. I watched a dance at a national convention with one of the most famous square dance callers in the world, and he was there. And granted, it was at the advanced level, but he, like you said, looked down at one square and tried to call to him while the whole floor was standing still. And I couldn't believe it. Now, and then Elmer Sheffield watched me call, and I turned my back on the floor and looked him in the eye, and I called to the floor, and the whole floor did the whole sequence, resolved back to home and everything, and I never looked at him, and he was looking at me back into the floor. He says, how do you do that? How do you do that? You put things together that are natural. And if you do that, people, and when I teach my classes, I had a philosophy. I says, it's okay if I call a square you don't know or you don't remember. You don't remember the call, take 2 steps, please. Just take 2 steps forward, even if you don't know what you're doing. And to help do my point, I had this gentleman in the class, Jack Terry, who was a 2nd grade teacher, and I would call the tip, and he'd take his partner and promenade out the door and come back again. And then I say, see, that's what I'm talking about. Square dancing is all about movement. Don't worry, it'll come to you. You know, and sometimes it's just a reaction time. So if you could get your dancers to trust you and take 2 steps, that's a lot of thought processing time. And seeing everybody else what they're doing, they can 9 times out of 10 nail it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I remember in calling was Kim Lindner and Gerhard Kahn told me very often that dancers in Europe will watch callers to see if they're watching a floor or watching a square. And it's kind of a joke, or it was at the time, and a running gag that you would put. If you could ever find a caller that did this, they always tried to set that caller up, because he'd always pick a favorite, you know, the second one on the left or the third one back 1 row on the right, and that would be the square that they would always watch. You know, they'd look at the floor, but they'd always watch that square.
Yeah.
And once they identified that, they'd get a group that was all in good colors, and he'd watch the square, head square through. Yeah, I'm watching them. I know where they're at. And he'd come back. And then as soon as they got home, they'd all just start dancing the grand spin over and over and over again until he's ready to resolve and goes back to his square, and they're not doing what he's calling. And the dancers would set the, and they would do it. It was like a running joke. The first time it happened to me, because I was notorious when I was learning, I'd watch the floor, but I'd always, yeah, and I learned very quickly, okay, start writing down 3 squares. Start learning 3 squares. Just in case. And I started developing that habit. But it was something that the dancers actually did themselves to play with the callers. And all the callers knew that this would happen. It was great.
Or I did that. Yeah, go.
I did that at a dance, and we had this one gentleman, Harold, in the club, and he was the clown, and he would watch me. And I did what you did. I would always keep panning the floor, then I go back to my side square. Well, he would keep his eye on me, and when I look away, he would switch with another guy or something. And then, so I did that and resolved, and the whole floor breaks down, and they get back home. But you know what I did? I said, everybody give a big hand to Harold. He caught me. And, I thought it was funny, and so the floor thought it was funny. So it had turned a bad moment into a plus there. But I've been caught in that situation too. Not usually.
We had some
all I
guests
can say
over
is
there
when you, sorry, go ahead,
which
Mickey.
kind of have the sport to do some trade, or the head boys traded, or in the grand square they switched, or they changed boys and girls. So they always looked which was the watching square, and there were known dancers. And usually I had a trick. I looked at them and were checking them and taking it as a watching square, but as a matter of fact, I took the other square next to them. So I didn't worry about it. So
that's cool.
That was the most common one that was done to me, because I'd watch the floors and say, okay, get through your squares, and they noticed I was doing that. And what they would do is they would line up so that the squares are in very neat rows, so that when they did a promenade, or if you got into a tidal wave, swing through the centers of the wave in two squares would create the wave, and you do centers trade, they'd trade, and you wouldn't see that. So you'd have the two boys on the end of the wave in two squares. They would do a trade. Or when you do a promenade, they'd just promenade and switch the two couples they'd promenade into the opposite square. And if you're not watching, suddenly you go to your resolve square. Yeah, I know where my square is. That corner's in a completely different square, And all I can say is, as a caller, especially as a new caller, that creates panic. It shouldn't. What that should create is the fact that you're not going to resolve that square. You know that no matter what you do, you've lost it, and you should take extreme pride in that, because you know that your dancers have enough confidence in your calling ability that they feel that you're good enough that they can play around on you. And that is one hell of a compliment.
And here comes in the beauty of modules and mental image.
Yeah.
And that's what I would do, Mickey. I would go back to, because there was one square that I watched that never made a mistake. It was in my head. And I could literally watch this makeup square while I was calling. And I would do that. I'd just move my head around, and so everybody thought I was watching them. That's all. I remember once a dancer, I had 20 squares on I don't know if it was 20, could have been 18 or so. But, it was a full big hall. It was a big class. And one couple made a mistake. And so I fixed it for them, and I told them what to do. Come up afterwards and said, how did you know that we made a mistake? How could you got to be such a genius? And I says, I couldn't tell them, but you got to be an idiot. Only one couple is out of place in a whole room. When you got this beautiful flow going, and all of a sudden there's a crash over in the corner. Of course you know what happened. Your eyes are drawn to it.
We had a classic couple in our club who used to love switching.
Yeah.
They whenever they met, they'd switch. And that was it. But you knew if you just stuck to your guns that they were probably going to be right anyway, even if they arrived back home as a boy and a girl opposite to each other.
Oh, we did a tip one time at a Golden State Roundup where the caller was watching us, and we had two squares, and all of a sudden one boy and one girl switched, so that square had 5 boys, this one had 5 girls. Then on the next one, all of a sudden it was 6 and 2, 7. Then it was 8 girls and 8 boys in 2 different squares. And by the end of the singing call, we were all back in a normal square.
Ladies and
How do you
gentlemen,
call
I
those
want to-
dancers which help out in a class? They support you?
Oh yeah, I loved having my angels come and help and teach
Well, they can
and
be devils
support
too.
class. They do that. they knew that they would teach exactly the way I taught in my classes. And I was very happy to go down and watch, and let them do the teach, helping out another couple. I like that. And I always had good results from it. I never had people teach it different than the way I taught.
Well, I was just looking for the name angels because of dancers messing around with us scholars, that's the devils. So I was look, they can be devils too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I learned something last night. On that reverse wheel around problem of teaching it, and I realized for years, and I don't know if you had the same problem, but promenade, don't stop, slow down, everybody wheel around, and then you call everybody wheel around again, and at least 1/3 of the couples do a reverse wheeling around. What did I realize last night, dummy, after 45 years? What a great way to teach reverse wheel around. I'll let them do what they want. Everybody wheel around, promenade, go the wrong way. Everybody reverse wheel around, go the other way. And that's just a natural, make sense way to do it. And then you can establish the body flow of the two and lead into it for a mother.
That's what Helen was saying last week.
I wasn't here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is now 12 o'clock. I usually try and wrap up about now. I am absolutely ecstatic the discussion is going. Like I said, this was not a session on choreography or lessons. It was just an objective comparison between the basic program and the SSD program, and looking at some choreography without the mainstream components of the SSD program. I leave it to you to make up your own minds what works, what doesn't work for you. But if you're going to pick one or the other, just be true to that program. Put the dancers first. Let them dance. Let them enjoy it. Don't feel that obligation. As Jeff said, and as many others have said, it says 12 weeks. There's no way, I don't know anybody that will ever be successful bringing in 4 classes of SSD dancers a year if they're having a combined SSD mainstream group, or a group where you've got SSD graduate, then you've got SSD graduate, dancing SSD, and then you've got SSD new, SSD graduate, SSD dancing SSD, I've done SSD, all on the same night. It does not work. Give the dancers a place to dance, give them fun, give them entertainment, and it doesn't have to be difficult to be entertaining. A little bit of different works a long way. So enjoy the program. Once again, thank you, Mark, for doing everything. The session notes and the presentation will be posted on the OC Callers website along with the video. And for those of you that sent in the choreography, the comments, and all of the statements, I hope I covered everything that you've asked me to talk about. And good luck. As always, make your choice, stick to your guns. And I just want to add on, Mickey is the chairman of several committees, but one of the things that he is the chairman of is what's coming into as the Emphasis Call Committee. I believe you're the chairman or vice chairman?
The chairman of the subcommittee of the Basic Mainstream Committee.
So if you have the wherewithal and the time, pick a movement at the basic and the mainstream level. Write out some choreography, standard application, interesting use, not way out left tech field, and send him a whole list of, here's, I don't know, circle to a line as an example, choreography that uses that in a couple of singing calls or 3 or 4 singing calls, a couple of cornered boxes, partnered lines, just to use that, send it up, because we really want to start looking at choreography and putting an emphasis back on smooth, comfortable dancing instead of technical nightmares for callers trying to impress callers. So have a look, get in touch with Mickey if you're interested in doing that, and if you're not interested in being part of the committee, write it up and send it to him anyway. I'm quite sure he'll be happy to receive any material.
Anything will come.
So thanks a lot, everybody. If you want to stick around, I can leave the room open, but otherwise that's it for me. We're about five minutes over my cutoff time.
Hey Mel, I got one thing to tell you.
Yes.
Sorry I missed a lot of the meeting, but looks like I'm starting my own club.
All right, Mark. Good job.
Glad
So
to hear.
I've been on the phone for the last couple hours with different people, and it looks like I'm going to be starting my own club. I got the go ahead from. Huh?
Yeah, I must admit, I saw you on the phone. It looked like you were conducting negotiations of some kind. I said, "Geez, that's a serious phone call."
Yeah, I was on the phone with my boss. I work at a school, and we talked about me renting the hall, and I'm going to pretty much get it for about $25 a night. Because I work there and I won't need a custodian or anything. So I'm getting all kinds of discounts. And then I talked to a couple people, and I'm going to be starting another handy-capable club.
All right.
Cool.
Congratulations.
So
Good luck with that, Mark.
I got one square. People I've talked to, I've got a total of one square right now. And the way they're talking, they think they can get another 5 or 6 squares. The way they're talking.
That is
Well,
that's
yes,
just
they
awesome,
always
Mark.
talk. But
Yeah,
Even
good luck
one
with that.
square is yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, pretty soon,
Awesome.
Mark, what it's going to be is you can either go to your dance or you can go to Mark's dance, whichever has the biggest crowd, and it'll be yours.
yeah.
You go dance with Mark Hart or go to the national convention, but Mark has a bigger dance, so go there.
Nah, I don't think it's going to be like that.
Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. I haven't got anything on the plan or schedule for next week. And like I said, we may be rolling back to fortnightly in the new year. Actually, we probably will be rolling back to fortnightly, or maybe the second and fourth Sunday of the month, something along that line. But I will let everybody know that because we are in most places in the world getting back to dancing and calling. So by all means, and if you have any topics or anything else that you want specifically looked at like this one, send it to me via email, and I will be more than happy to put it on the list and see if I can get the right people to deal with it. Take care, everybody.
Okay. I would like to make one comment about one of the figures that you presented.
Sure.
That I didn't care for that girl circulate courtesy turn. That was a